Good afternoon and welcome to the Glendale Redevelopment Agency meeting of April 26, 2011. May we have a roll call, please? Mr. City Clerk.
Agency members Friedman.
Here.
Najarian.
Here.
Quintero.
Here.
Weaver.
Here.
Chairman Nukian.
You ready? Okay, I will call the Glendale Housing Authority to order, the April 26, 2011 meeting. May we have a roll call, please?
Authority members Friedman.
Here.
Manukian.
Here.
Mincy.
Here.
Najarian.
Here.
Parazian.
Here.
Weaver.
Here.
Chair Quintero.
Here. May we have your report?
The agenda for the April 26, 2011 regular meeting of the Glendale Housing Authority was posted on Thursday, April 21, 2011 on the bulletin board outside City Hall.
What's next?
There are no minutes for approval for this meeting. Next item 5 is oral communication. Same rules apply, 5 minutes, and items are to be addressed that are not a part of this agenda. There was one card submitted.
I have one card, Herbert Milano.
Thank you very much, Chairman Quintero, members of the Housing Authority, and staff. My name is Herbert Milano. Yesterday, during the budget study session, I observed the fact that some of the programs that are normally under the purview of the Housing Authority, such as the youth employment programs and the meals for the elderly, were being moved out of the general fund into their own independent funding. And it came to my mind that in some cities, such as the city of Irvine, the city normally allocates roughly about $2 million from this general fund to augment programs that are supported by the respective housing authority and HUD and programs such as CDBG. This city, as I observed during the years, especially the last few years, we have seen the funds from HUD diminish, has not stepped up to augment those funds that support the nonprofits, that support youth employment, that support all these programs for the people who are underserved. What I have seen is a very significant increase in pay and benefits and pension increases that are basically have a stranglehold on the funds of the city. So those families and those communities with the least resources and the ones who are the most at risk generally, apparently to me, receive the fewest benefits. And I want to highlight something that to me is pertinent, that is those quality of life indicators that have to do with parkland. I've seen during the years how when parkland is needed for Southern Glendale, we either get very small postage stamp size parks, such as parks that cover only 2 parcels or maybe 3, corner areas that don't provide sufficient recreational facilities for youth. I'm talking about teenagers and young adults. And what I see is that the city waits for it to get HUD funds, money from the federal government, to then allocate it to those parks. And as part of its overall objectives, it doesn't do it as part of its general budget preparation. What I'd like to show again is a graph that appears now with a comparison of parkland to area. The man represents 1,000 people, and the tree, every foot of it represents one acre. This is area 11, Glenox Canyon, and as you can see, there are 6.67 acres per thousand. The data comes from the recreational planning documents from the city. If we go down to the next area, area 2, that's 5.9 acres per thousand. If you go down, continue down below, area 1, 5.4 acres per thousand, and so on. And I would like to basically to summarize it by going, as we go further down now, to the next slide, 3.35 acres per thousand. Keep going, area 3, 2 acres per thousand. Let's continue to the next one, area 6, 0.6 acres per thousand. As we continue further down, area 7.56 acres per thousand, area 9.36 acres per thousand, continue area 8.23 acres per thousand, recreation area 5.23, and Area 10.1017 acres per thousand. And that's at a time before additional construction occurred and additional population increases. I can count probably at least 6 major projects of additional density in this area. And I'd like to bring this up because this is one of the issues that to me is an issue about justice and fairness. That is at the core of how you develop policy, how you develop your budgets, and that the outcomes have to show with regard to how it fits and accomplishes quality of life indicators. And I'm not averse, building additional units, but I am concerned about the fact that the adequate or corresponding parkland is not being addressed. And I think that the city should consider that for any new development that is taking place and ask that question, how are we providing for the open space and recreational facilities for all of the residents that are coming into these areas? I appreciate your comments back. Thanks.
Question. Mr. Milano, if I may. The slides, they're city documents?
These slides are now part of the city website, but I prepared those along with my son and submitted it to the city during the study sessions that we have on quality of life.
Since we're going to be dealing with budgeting for parks tomorrow, do you have that anywhere available?
It's available on the web.
On the web? Okay.
Yeah, on the city's website. Thank you very much.
The city's website?
The city's website, yes.
And under what, so I don't go searching for it?
I will forward it to Councilmember
Thank you.
and to the rest of the council.
Mr. Chair.
Weaver.
Yeah, when I got elected in '97, I found that report. I read the report. I knew that this was the area that was the greatest need of park and recreation. I voted against the shopping center across the street. It was identified as the greatest need. My colleagues didn't agree, and we have a shopping center across the street providing limited revenue to the city. So that was the last big piece of land we have around here, and we won't see it again. It's nothing new. Go find a parcel big enough to put soccer fields on in this area now. You're not going to find it. Thank you.
The colleagues he's referring to are not the ones that are currently
No,
on the...
1997.
Okay, next, please.
Next item is business agenda at 6A is Director of Community Development regarding consideration of developer and project selection monitoring criteria. At 6A1 is resolution adopting developer and project selection criteria monitoring requirements.
I'm sorry, before we go on, I'm having technical difficulty with the city's internet site. I don't know what's going on, but I'm not able to access it. Is it? Okay. So I don't have anything in front of me at this point.
Maybe we can tell IT that the internet seems to be down in here.
We'll do that.
I'll get on it.
Meantime, do you want the written report?
Remember the old days?
We'll have somebody turn a page for you.
All right, Mr. Starbird, 6A.
Yes, I go to Peter Zovak, Assistant Director for Housing. The staff report, Peter.
Yes, Mr. Chair, members of the Housing Authority, just for a matter of clarification, you should have, in addition to the report, you should have a PowerPoint that was placed on your desk, as well as a one-page recap of all the recommended policy considerations before you. We thought that might be easier to have them all on one page than flipping back and forth between policy 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5. So that's just on your desk for reference. Community development staff is requesting that the Housing Authority adopt a resolution establishing developer and project selection and monitoring criteria for future affordable housing projects in Glendale. As you know, the Housing Authority has been the agency responsible for the development of affordable housing projects in Glendale since 1975. In that time, the Housing Authority has assisted thousands of households with rental assistance, dwelling rehabilitation loans and grants, first-time homebuyer loans, helping them on an annual basis. In addition, the Housing Authority has partnered with many for-profit and nonprofit entities to develop approximately 1,000 new affordable housing units and new projects. Most of these projects were successfully developed utilizing various methodologies and policies that were in place at that time that sought to achieve some basic principles related to quality affordable housing. To the extent possible, these basic principles have been incorporated into the previous projects, and we look to continue to incorporate them into projects that are coming before you for the future. These basic principles that we look to find in our affordable housing projects are projects that are located in areas that meet community expectations based on good planning practices. We looked at having housing projects that provide high-quality, livable units, that achieve good, sustainable design, present sound construction and management practices, projects that realize appropriate economic terms. Those would be economic terms for both the Housing Authority as well as the developer to ensure it being able to run successfully over time. And we look for projects that consist of the highest standards that will stand as a benchmark for success. Staff recommends that the methodologies and policies that have guided us in the past be updated and formalized so that they may be better able to support and help achieve success in future projects. To that end, community development, city attorney, city audit, and housing authority economic consulting staff and legal counsel met to review and discuss whether certain housing authority policies could be implemented to ensure that projects reflect the housing authority's guiding principles and projects. These policies, if implemented, will provide a standardized process for evaluating and selecting developers, identifying and monitoring projects and project construction, and help promote a more transparent, fair, and objective process for evaluating and monitoring developers and proposals in the future. Recommendations at this time include policy considerations in the areas of developer identification and selection. I need my glasses. Developer vetting and screening, project financing, development selection, development and project monitoring, and policy considerations related to design. There is no, just as an aside, there is no fiscal impact associated with the adoption of the criteria that we're presenting to you today. As specific projects are brought before you for consideration, fiscal impacts will be noted at that time. These are just policies. In the past, developers of affordable housing projects were selected through one of three methods, either through response to an RFQ, request for qualifications, or request for proposals, RFP process, through a sole source determination made by the Housing Authority, or through unsolicited, what we call over-the-counter proposals that have been received from developers. While community development staff does not recommend eliminating any of these methods to select developers, staff believes that certain policies should be adopted and applied as future affordable housing projects are contemplated. With regards to the RFQ-RFP process, that process allows an agency to clearly articulate its goals and expectations regarding the creation of an affordable housing project through an open and competitive process. By including guidance on project design expectations, populations to be served, parameters on financial assistance to be provided, developer evaluations and weightings of projects could be more easily achieved and compared. An example of a recent action which the Housing Authority has gone through an RFQ-RFP process would be the Thomas Safran project, Gardens on Garfield, that went through an extensive RFP process. Took about a year and a half to go through. Project recently completed. Second item, the second, going back, Artie, please. Back? Yeah. One more. The second process in which to identify developers through sole source. Sole sourcing is a non-competitive procurement process utilized when it's determined that a certain provider possesses a unique product having singular characteristics or performance capability. In the example of affordable housing, sole sourcing has been utilized by the Housing Authority when it has identified a specific project with certain parameters that it wished to achieve, in which only a few developers or even one developer could provide. An example of that for the Housing Authority projects would be both the Habitat for Humanity project, small scale, 10 units or less, ownership product, done in a setting in which there is sweat equity conducted by the applicants and community participation. And I would say home ownership for low income, which was one of the hardest to achieve. And then the Door and Gardens project, new market tax credits, one single developer with an allocation of those new market tax credits, historical setting in terms of the project itself, and the developer being very familiar and experienced in historical preservation. Then the third method is the over-the-counter process, and that is just unsolicited developer proposals. This process allows developers the ability to propose affordable housing projects with concepts and property identified by the developer under timelines that are unique to their proposal. And an example of that would be the Chester Street project with the Salvation Army. It's a property that the Salvation Army had site control over, one of theirs, put a project proposal together and brought it before the authority. So going to, Artie, I'm sorry, if we can go to policy consideration number 1, back 2 slides. So with regards to RFQ and the RFP process, and under the heading of developer identification selection, policy consideration number 1 that staff was to come up with is to recommend that all housing authority, city, or redevelopment agency-owned property to be privately developed as affordable housing be subject to a competitive RFQ and or RFP process. I think it's been demonstrated not only here in Glendale, but other agencies that provide and use this policy for developer identification. Competitive process brings out the best in a product, brings out the best in the economics, and is the ideal way to be able to go forward with affordable housing projects in which property is held by the authority, city, and or agency. Under the sole sourcing, recognizing that there are instances in which sole sourcing would be more advantageous to pursue, staff is recommending that all future housing authority sole source determinations be made pursuant to some specific findings of fact as to why the sole source determination has been made. We've mentioned some of the uniqueness of the Habitat and Door and Gardens project. So in translating that to specific findings, we look at projects that meet a special need or a focused population, small development, they could be historically significant, they could propose unique community partnerships, and there could be very little limited leverage funding sources. So if the Housing Authority were to ever make a sole source determination, we would look for some findings of facts to accompany that determination to justify being able to sole source out a particular property for affordable housing development. Number 3 reflects over-the-counter proposals, and we'd recommend that all over-the-counter proposals, once deemed complete and thoroughly reviewed by staff, be presented to the Housing Authority for consideration and direction. We would look to do that as quickly as possible to give the developer the ability to have their projects timely reviewed, as well as the authority to be able to weigh in early on the process so that as little work is done as possible before knowing whether or not there's an interest in the project. Going on. The second process is the developer vetting and screening process. Developer submittals for proposals vary depending upon the organization, their mission, and their method of operations. While community development staff has attempted to consolidate all submittals into a uniform process, some developers have expressed reluctance to conform and provide such information. As a result, the review processes can take longer, and full disclosures may be difficult to achieve beforehand. Staff, as a result, is proposing as a policy consideration what we're calling number 4. We recommend that all developers be required to submit documents and information specified in what's been created and attached to your staff report as exhibit number 1, and calling a due diligence checklist. Some of the items required and spelled out in the checklist, examples would be the checklist requires 3 years business audited financial statements to accompany a proposal by a developer, 3 years of business income tax returns, letters of good standing and bankruptcy, development team information, and we mean to request the entire development team from the developer themselves to their architects to any selected contractors, letters of recommendation, any disclosures with regards to any lawsuits, and require that it be provided on what would be prepared and called a standardized pro forma. Pro formas can differ from developer to developer, the way they're presented, the way they're looked at and put together. So we'd look to have a standardized pro forma process in place that the developers would be able to plug in. Project financing. Oh, and let me go back to standardized pro formas. What we're looking at is establishing a two-step process for pro formas, a preliminary pro forma for the initial over-the-counter or submittals, and then as the projects receive some type of interest from the Housing Authority and they start to get negotiated further on down the process, a much more in-depth pro forma that allows staff to look at a number of things within the project proposal. Construction quality, materials, be able to look at reports and call up square footage costs, be able to identify certain sub-trades and what those costs might be. So a much more in-depth analysis and preparation of a pro forma. Project financing. The earlier that the Housing Authority's financial assistance is contributed towards a project or is subordinate to other financing terms, the more risk there is, and there's more risk that the authority accepts for its funding. Certain measures could be taken by the authority to strengthen its position in funding in projects. As a result, CD staff proposes the following measures. We recommend that all Housing Authority funding be contributed on a pro rata basis with other funding sources. So as every dollar is pulled for a payment on a project, that the Housing Authority's portion be in ratio to the Housing Authority's overall assistance to the project. Oftentimes, there are certain projects in which developers negotiate assistance from the Housing Authority or other leveraged funding sources to go out first and therefore be at risk on these projects. We think that a fair process for not only for the Housing Authority but all the other funding sources that are out there on a particular project is on a pro rata basis. We would look to require that affordability covenants not subordinate to any other financing when feasible. We've not been able to always get this because private construction lenders might require this, and within the report there's a process in which there's an inability to require the affordability covenants to be senior to all their financing. There's a process in which the authority would make a determination that it must be subordinate as a result of the requirements of some of the other programs. But we would first look to have those covenants be senior. We've had that ability in some projects. We've had some limited success in requiring that. And we like to be able to approach developers and approach other lenders where we were able to say, no, that's an actual Housing Authority policy and it's required. And there's another process to be able to get that way, but right now it's a requirement. And sometimes lenders do ask that, well, is it a written policy? Does it require this? Does it require that? And there seems to be some room for negotiation with some of the lenders on this. One thing we've been doing lately with some of the tax credit projects is to structure the proposals as long-term ground leases when feasible. That is something the Housing Authority has initiated back in 2005 in some of the projects. It seems to be working. Overall, the Housing Authority will retain the overall ownership of these units and then commit to the long-term ground lease with the developers. It gives the Housing Authority years out from now, unfortunately sometimes 55 years, in some cases 90 years out from now, some ability to be able to have some property come back to them at the end of the affordability terms. And when possible, we think we should always pursue that. We may require some developers, depending upon the complexity of their projects and the risk, to require that they provide personal guarantees on their projects. And we may require developers to secure, and will require developers to secure other leverage funding sources that we would then look at these other leverage funding sources and ask that the Housing Authority, when these other sources are obtained, the Housing Authority's assistance be written down or offset by any additional sources of funds that come in. And the recommendation is on at least a 50% basis for funds received. So an example would be that a project has all of its necessary funding lined up. The authority has made a commitment of funding. After the fact, the developer also is able to secure, let's say, City of Industry funds as an example. If the developer is able to secure City of Industry funds, rather than incorporate that into the project and capture 100% of those funds, we would want at least on a 50% basis for the Housing Authority's assistance to be written down. In terms of development selection, it's critically important that the selection of the development proposals and alternatives be made using the standardized selection criteria. This will help promote a fair and transparent process. The development criteria should be applied to all housing development scenarios, whether they're over-the-counter submittals, purchase and rehabilitation of existing units, or consideration to develop land currently in the Housing Authority's portfolio. Development selection should consider the following items as part of the selection criteria. We are looking for projects that meet, where the developments meet the community's needs, developments meet housing authority funding requirements, developments must be financially feasible, demonstrate site control, and we will look at the timing of the development to ensure that they are a development timeline process that would help to be able to, the housing authority to be able to achieve projects in a timely manner, not necessarily projects that are strung out over a number of years and just waiting to be able to get additional funding sources to make them work. In terms of developer project monitoring, once a developer and project have been identified, staff recommends that certain controls be implemented throughout construction and after construction and completion. This will help ensure that projects are being developed according to budget and in conformance with approved affordable housing agreements. In some of these scenarios, staff would anticipate that most of these recommendations here in this particular category will require added administration work and/or work on behalf of the developer, some of which may resist such measures, but if the authority were to require it and make it a requirement of these proposals, we'd be able to have these types of measures pay off on a project in the long run. And what these policy considerations are, they vary. We are asking that the developers maintain and submit to the city, either as they're identified prior to project construction starting or during project construction, a master list of all contractors, subcontractors that are working on the project. And that information would be kept by staff and shared with any other departments and or those interested in finding out about the employees that are out on the job sites. We're requiring that developers must bid out subcontracting work of at least 3 major construction trades, and those trades would be identified by staff. And we would look at the type of project being proposed, take a look at the 3 largest trades that are out there. Typically, you see concrete, you see electrical, you see plumbing, things along those lines. We'd require at least 3 trades go out to bid. We would be looking for 3 competitive bids for each trade and an explanation as to why and to who the developer is selecting for those particular trades. And in the event that the developer also operates as a general contractor, staff would require and could require more than 3 construction trades.
Quick question.
Quick question. So they would only have to bid out those within those 3 trades. You wouldn't force them to bid out, let's say, an architect service if it's a contractor who's worked with the same architect for years.
At the time that the developers typically come in, they usually have their architects identified, so that would be a little bit more difficult to have an architect associated with the developer take a project through a very initial review, start to get through negotiations, and then say, Mr. Developer, you're going to need to now start contracting out your services for architecture.
I just wanted to be sure because certainly just the lowest bid with something like an architect that has such a huge impact on the project doesn't always get you the best project.
Sure.
So I wanted to be sure that there was that flexibility at least with that sort of subcontractor, that they didn't just have to go by lowest bid. They could.
Right. And I think it's more so construction subcontracting work
Right.
on site. And as it reads in the report, it says that reasons why the developer is selecting that particular contractor. So we also are sensitive to low bid. Low bid doesn't always necessarily guarantee you a good quality project. So in any particular case where there might be a low bidder and the developer is necessarily recommending someone who comes in above that, we'd want to know why, the reasons why. And there might be some legitimate reasons as to why.
I might add, the city wouldn't retain an architect to a bid process for its own projects. We'd use a request for proposals and based on qualifications. So this would be consistent with the way we handle our own projects.
To address another concern for those developers that are also operate as their general contractor, we would require those developers to bid out general contracting work or provide evidence satisfactory to the authority that the use of a sole source general contractor is necessary to make the project financially feasible and provide the developer better quality control of the project. So not only are we interested about subcontractors on a project, we're also interested as to who the general contractor is. There may be reasons why the developer is associated with a particular general contractor, experience on past projects, good performance, things like that. But we want to be able to have some comparisons as to this general contractor's work versus what others out there are charging. As staff begins to process requests for payments, it is proposed that community development staff randomly contact subcontractors and request direct copies of billings for comparison purposes to what the developer has submitted. Such requests will be made based upon a number of factors, including the billing amount, the scope of the work, and whether the developer has a pattern of using the same subcontractors. So even though a subcontractor may have been approved by the housing authority or staff and project commences, as certain billings come in, we would want to contact the actual subcontractor, compare submitted billings versus billings that the subcontractors provided. So third-party verification of billings. And in all cases, the housing authority will retain approval rights over the general contractor. In all cases, the housing authority will retain sole discretion approval rights over the CPA hired by the developer to certify project costs. And in giving such approval, the housing authority may consider such factors as experience in the type of affordable housing project under consideration and the relationship with the developer and its principals. For instance, some of the more complicated 9% tax credit projects require cost certifications at the end of the project to all of the funding sources, on behalf of all the funding sources. California Tax Credit Allocation Committee, the private equity investors, City of Glendale, any other soft agency financing. The CPA, who is certifying project costs, as we've seen recently, could contribute to instances in which the developer may not be submitting true billings. So we want to be able to look at the CPA beforehand, find out who that person is, do some due diligence screening on them, take a look at what the relationships may be with the developer. For instance, does the CPA maybe operate as the in-house accountant for the development company? Could that be considered a conflict? Is there enough separation? Things like that. We'd really want to be able to take a look at these projects and feel comfortable about a CPA who would be coming in at the end of a project and doing cost certification. And in certain large-scale projects, staff is recommending that the housing authority, at the expense of the developer, have the ability to hire its own second independent CPA to monitor these projects. And with that, we move from developer project monitoring to our last policy consideration that has to do with design. Depending upon where the project is being proposed in the city, it might require design review approval only of the redevelopment agency, or outside of agency areas might require the city's design review board to have review approval rights. We thought that would be best to recommend one uniform process for all affordable housing projects. I think that the more review that's given to these projects, at least staff's position is, more review that's given by projects, given by those that are looking at designs on a regular basis, as the DRB is, require that all developments be reviewed by the city's design review board, regardless of whether they're inside or outside the project area, and require that final design approval be obtained by the city design review board prior to final approval by the housing authority on design. Just adding one additional review process for some of the projects. And with that, that will conclude the report on development selection criteria.
We should note that all of these policy items are incorporated in the resolution that's attached. Staff's recommending adoption of the resolution, thereby formalizing these various policy considerations for future review of development proposals.
Mr. Chair, I would like to
Mr. Manukian.
request that PowerPoint be sent to me through email. So I have an electronic version of it.
By the way, ISD is working on the internet situation as we speak.
Okay, any other comments? Ms. Friedman, then Mr. Nachari.
A couple comments. First, I'm very glad to see this come forward. It's long overdue as far as I'm concerned. I have some questions. In terms of the design review approval, Would that include projects that are in redevelopment areas, which currently are not subject to design review?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. Actually, it's recommended that way so that those projects that would only be subject to redevelopment review actually are required to go before the DRB board.
And would the DRB be making recommendations the way that our staff normally does with redevelopment projects, or would they be making conditions that have to be abided by?
We would look to have it uniform as if the project was outside the project areas, which would require city DRB approval with any recommendations they feel are necessary to be granted the approval process.
Okay,
If I could just expand on that. If it's inside the project area and it's normally coming before the agency for review, that's the approving body. So it would be a recommendation from the City Design Review Board, unless the council wants to actually change the code, because right now the code requires that it be approved by the agency. But we can always make it go to the Design Review Board for recommendation and have all those recommendations incorporated into the staff's approval that comes before the agency board for approval.
It would be my preference that we made the design review have the final authority in terms of design that could be modified by council if they wish, but I think we did a disservice, and I understand the rationale in trying to streamline the process, but I think we did a disservice when we removed design review authority from redevelopment areas. Although I do trust the staff and their recommendations, but I think we need to maybe have further discussion about that. So that's my one comment. I have questions about, I think it's the bullet point that says provide high-quality livable units under the housing project principles, or maybe it's somewhere under the policy criteria. When I look around at the affordable housing projects that have been done by the City of Glendale over the years, there's a wide gamut of quality levels. There's some projects like Gardens on Garfield that you look at, and in my mind I say that's a very high-quality project. We would do well to have other projects that are of that quality level. It's raised the bar in terms of design and building for the neighborhood. It's a great place to live. I would live there. It looks like luxury housing. The materials, the quality, everything about it is really exceptional. And then there's other projects that fall short of that. All of the financial safeguards that we're putting into place are wonderful, and I think that they're going to go a really long way in making sure that we don't have issues in the future. But I'm not sure how. I'm concerned about the financial health of the projects, but I'm also concerned about that quality level, because to me, one of the things we also need to work on is making sure that each and every affordable housing project is the highest quality project that we can get, the best for the residents, the best for the neighborhood. And I'm still not quite sure how we're going to set up criteria to make sure that happens. Who judges that? Who makes that decision? How do we rank developers? Do we do that in public? When projects come forward, is there some kind of a scale and the staff actually says this is a 5 developer or this is a 10 developer? Because I think that we need to have that kind of staff recommendation, and it needs to be strong. And if the council wants to go with a developer that staff believes is not as high a quality developer as someone else who's been on the project or someone else that we could go to, I think the council should need to explain why that is. So I'm wondering what the process is, who makes those determinations, and based on what criteria, and how we're going to ensure in the future that all of our projects are as high quality as we can possibly get. Because outside of the financial health of these projects and of the developers is one thing, and I think you've really done a great job at setting up a very rigorous list of criteria to do that, but I don't see that much rigor on the other side, on the quality side. And I don't know if that's because it's more of a judgment call or how you can make sure that that happens in the future.
I would say some of that would be, or a lot of that would be a judgment call that's been made by staff. And one of the benefits of the reorganization of the community redevelopment and housing now into planning, the new community development, the ability to be able to access a number of different co-workers that can be very involved in the project, more so than what we've had in the past. So we would look to let's say, the design studio team, be able to look at a proposal, to look at, and then as a whole, all of the employees, to be able to look at development costs. And when we say that we look for projects in which the development costs are reasonable costs, it's not to say that we would necessarily come back and say, project A is the cheapest project, as a result we recommend that. It may be the cheapest project, but it might have the most difficulty with regards to design. So there may be some development costs that are higher, but are warranted in the cases of which there might be a more superior design associated with that proposal that would fit much better in a particular community, and we would look at that and balance that between proposals and come back to the authority with a recommendation.
You had a comment, Mrs. Harmon?
I completely agree. I think that, though, it would be helpful to try and formalize what Peter just said in the resolution. I'm thinking the Section 7 that addresses design review, which I think gets us where you'd like to go, Mayor Friedman, without having to modify the code. This says every project shall go to design review with recommendations to the authority. I think we can incorporate some additional language that says just what Peter has just described, which is the housing and planning staff shall evaluate projects in an effort to balance the cost versus quality to ensure that the quality of projects coming forward to the Housing Authority and City Council are of the quality that the Council has expected. Some language like that will include in the design review the planning and housing staff's opinion on this balance between cost and quality.
I agree, and to me it's not just project by project or design by design, but I think you really have to look at the track record of the developers. And a lot of the developers that are out there that work in the affordable housing arena do projects that are fine. They're sort of what we've come to expect from affordable housing, and you can kind of recognize them when you drive around different cities, and to some extent you can recognize them when you're in Glendale. And I would love to see that we raise the bar and if a developer, if that's what they've been developing, I would be much less likely to want to enter into a project with them than a developer like some of the developers we've worked with who have a track record of doing really exceptional projects. And I don't know exactly how, without using the discretion and the judgment of the housing department and of the planning department to really say, this is the A-list of developers who work in our area. These are the ones that have a proven track record. The other guys who submit, their stuff's okay, there's nothing wrong with them, but how do we make it clear that when we have projects that are proposed or when we go out for RFPs, how do we separate those different developers into those categories? Because it's not just what they've submitted on paper. I think you can tell a lot by what you're going to get, by what companies have done in the past. And I've seen that with our projects. We have projects that developers that have done great work around the area, and then they come and build something here, and it's great. And then other ones that have done okay work, and they come here, and it's okay.
I think a step in that direction would be to specifically require that the planning and housing staff give the City Council and Housing Authority a report and recommendation on this issue of achieving the appropriate quality to meet the expectations in the community, balanced with the costs, and do an evaluation on any developer that comes forward where we will give you a specific evaluation of what we view as the quality of their projects. And then ultimately you can decide that along with your review of the Design Review Board's evaluation of the project. I don't think you can have a specific checklist, and I'm not sure it's realistic to think you can have developers who qualify and developers who don't, because somebody may come in the door that would meet your expectations and we don't have experience on them, but we can certainly find out by visiting projects, talking to the folks that they've done work for, and then evaluating what they're specifically proposing.
Well, in the past, I'm sure that staff has made recommendations in terms of our housing projects. So how is it that we have some housing projects that are exceptional and we have some housing projects that, if we were going to do it over again, probably you would want to pick someone else? Did you not do that in the past? Is this something that never occurred to anybody, or was it that council overrode the staff's recommendations?
I think it's a number of things. If we want to go back to the Garfield and Gardens on Garfield project, that was, as we mentioned earlier, an RFP process, a competitive process. Best proposal necessarily, wins in that particular instance, and the best proposals rise to the top. There are other projects that, while they do serve and provide affordable housing, may not be the best designed projects, and I could say there could be a number of different reasons for it. The timeline to entitle those projects may not have allowed a more thorough review of their design and input as to design qualities. I can think of a number of different projects that kind of fit that mode and was just, this is it needs to be done and entitled within the next 3 months. There's not a lot of opportunity to be able to comment on something like that.
I think the first step toward getting there, though, is articulating in your formally adopted policy what your expectations are. Now, what your charge to staff is, in terms of evaluating a project and bringing you back, their assessment of whether or not they feel that it achieves your purpose or not.
Well, I think that you take my point, which is I think you've done a great job at setting up criteria to ensure the economic viability and stability of projects going into the future. I don't see that same rigor in terms of the quality of the developer and of the project. And I understand that some of that is because it is somewhat arbitrary, but going forward, I just want to make it clear that besides the financial part of this, what's important to me in terms of building housing in Glendale, affordable housing and housing that the city invests in, is that we provide those residents with the highest quality housing that we can, and the neighborhoods with the highest quality housing that we can.
And I was reminded by a project manager that the purpose of the two-step pro forma, the more in-depth pro forma with much more reporting requirements in that, one of the elements of that would be to call out a number of different materials to be identified in the second and more in-depth pro forma. So that would assist in being able to evaluate some of these proposals.
And last comment, and then I'll stop, I promise. I understand that the planning department is finally finishing multifamily design guidelines. So I also just want to comment that I'm glad that we're doing that. It's long overdue, and I'm hoping that that helps in terms of making sure that we have the most livable multifamily housing that we can get.
Mr. Najarian.
So, just so I understand, these are going to be, if adopted, our, we call them formal policy guidelines. I will not vote for this. Reason is, not a new reason, we're so focused on new construction and new development. We have totally ignored one of the principles that you've enumerated here about providing efficient and economic housing. I mean, page after page, we're going to pick their CPA, we're going to look at their tax returns, we're going to do this and that. It's clear, for some reason, our focus is only on new construction, and I think that is wrong. I think that is myopic. We have to always consider purchasing already built units, and in previous discussions, I've even pulled out the MLS listings, and I've showed you that these pre-existing units, that you can go in and see exactly what you're buying. You can look at the design guidelines, you can look at the parking issues, you can look at the quality, you can look at the fixtures and everything else, the location. Were in many cases factors cheaper than what the city's contribution was for this new construction. So I'm not happy that our formal policy is focused entirely on new construction. If it was up to me, I mean, my amendment to this would be that before we go out to an RFP, we find out what the approximate cost is and immediately do a canvass and find out what buildings and what units are available. And have that decision be made before we go in and ask for the tax returns and this and then and worry about the tax credits and all that other stuff. It's not just the quality of the housing. Sure, I'd love to live in a new house, but we also have an obligation to provide fast housing, immediate housing, and regular housing, and eliminate the uncertainties of new development, which we are all very much familiar with. You can pick a project, and we've all got uncertainties in that, and get it to these are clean, these are affordable, and these are units that are no better and they're no worse than the general public would be living in. Presumably they're either new buildings or they have previously been available to the public. So why are we solely focused on new construction? That's what I want to know. We've talked about it before. Why is it completely off the table, looking at existing buildings?
Anybody want to answer that?
Let me try.
Starbird.
Because this is the guidelines for when you do go out and solicit proposals or have new development. We haven't taken off the table the evaluation of existing units, and you had a whole long period where you talked about many of the units that were on your list and the economics of purchasing existing units. And there may be very good examples of where we will, but where you go outside, we own a piece of property as an example, 5th and Sonora. Likelihood you either are going to have to dispose of that or you're going to have to develop something on it. And we're getting up to the time frame for holding inventory properties before development. This addresses if you go outside and solicit proposals or want an outside development for that new development, this is a process for that. You have developers and agencies in the room today who are proposing the development of their properties. We haven't solicited them, but they're here anyway. If you want to consider any of them, these are the standards by which we'd recommend you do that and control it. But it does not take out of the picture the possibility of purchasing existing units. You can still do that, and that's still a viable alternative in those cases where it would work.
Well, where does that fit into our official policy?
Well, this policy is addressing new construction. And you've indicated to us a desire to look at opportunities for purchasing existing units. But, for example, veterans housing of the type that's been proposed by Mercy Housing, that likely isn't going to work effectively in existing development, especially where you may have small unit development. Now, that doesn't mean that that type of housing can't work in our portfolio, but for that particular purpose, it probably isn't a viable option. And you have a proposal before you for transfer of the home funds. The issue of 9% and 4% tax credits on existing housing. As we discussed before, you lose that viable financing alternative when you look at existing units. That doesn't mean existing units won't work, but the likelihood is you're going to see the economics be very different with respect to that, in addition to the supportive services that come with new development. This attempts to address, when you choose new development, these are the guidelines that we would recommend you adopt for that, for both the selection and the control of it.
But here's the problem. We've got a piece of property at 5th and Sonora. Do you know how much that's worth?
Well, we know what we spent on it. We spent $6 million on it.
We know what it's worth at this point. And should we not have a discussion as to whether the current value of that property, if sold on the open market, can obtain us a certain number of units in a certain location somewhere within the city? Why are we committed, just because we own a piece of land, to go through this whole process? I mean, it's a little bit ridiculous. We're going to check out their CPA, and once we check out their CPA, we're going to get their letters of recommendation, then we're going to send our own CPA in to check on their CPA. It seems like we're just building layer upon layer, and this might be very good for those one or two projects that we're going to do in the next few years, but the mere fact that we're having this discussion shows our bias towards going towards the new development. I want a preamble to this. Before we get to this, we have to lay before the council the opportunity to weigh the benefits and the opportunities to obtain pre-existing buildings. I don't know why we're ignoring that. The need for affordable housing is so great. My job here is to get as much affordable, clean, and safe, and maybe not the highest quality affordable housing, but something that's no better and no worse than our general population lives in. And I'd like to see, preamble. Find out what's on the open market and see if there's anything that's suitable towards the purposes of affordable housing.
Mr. Starbird.
And I would suggest the next item on your agenda is the appropriate place to take that up, where you have requests for specific projects, and we're looking at your interest in pursuing any of those. We have been asked over the past 6 months lots and lots of times about what steps we propose to take to try and prevent the kind of issues from arising with developers that we've experienced and we're still immersed in with respect to ADI. This is your staff's best recommendation on how to avoid another occurrence of that. It won't prevent it 100%, but we think this will go a long way in assisting us of avoiding a situation where you have a relationship with a new construction developer on a site. Now, what priority you give to new construction versus acquiring something, I think that's the next item on your agenda. And if you want to hold those projects until you vet whatever else is out there existing, that's your policy decision. We're more than happy to do that. This is about new construction and what controls we would recommend you implement in those cases where you use new construction. We all know what's occurred over the past 6 months with respect to ADI. We're trying to avoid that again when we deal with new construction and developers.
If you want to avoid an ADI situation, you buy an existing building. You know what you get. It's already built. You check it out. You've got inspectors. You know how much there is. You know what the cost is. You compare the cost.
Okay, let me make a few comments and then...
I just wanted to also weigh in on the issue of rehabilitation, if I could. Just in the resolution, what we had done is to make it the policy consistent with redevelopment law, which is it applies to new construction or what's termed substantial rehabilitation. It wouldn't be normal rehabilitation because it's rehabilitation where the after construction value of the unit the value of the rehabilitation is equal to 25% of the after construction value, including land. So it's going to be a high number. It's not going to apply to typical acquisition rehab, but where you're making substantial improvements to a property in addition to just rehabbing the interior of the units. But that's currently how we've drafted the policy, just to be consistent with how California redevelopment law applies to affordable housing developments. I just wanted to clarify that.
So, in a nutshell, what we did is we contemplated acquisition rehabilitation projects coming before the Housing Authority, coming before staff, and we looked at whether or not we wanted to subject a small rehab project to these stringent standards. And then that's when we took a look at the definition of provided for us in the redevelopment code, substantial rehabilitation, and that being a trigger to differentiate between a small-scale rehabilitation project versus a large-scale rehab project.
Okay.
And it wasn't the intent of staff to exclude acquisition rehab. As Mr. Starbird stated, the last time we had a discussion about that, staff acknowledged that there may be some opportunities to have an acquisition rehab project that be, in some cases, as feasible, in some limited cases, more feasible than new construction. We haven't found those projects yet, or a lot of these criteria can apply to both new construction and acquisition rehabilitation proposals. Since, in fact, as Starbird mentioned, the next item on the agenda would be one or two projects, I believe, that contemplate acquisition rehab.
All right, let me say I've been an advocate of rehabilitation for many years. However, you do have to pick and choose, so to speak, and what's kind of interesting to me, I've had a real estate license for many years. What's interesting to me in this cycle is that there just aren't that many deals out there in terms of condo projects that we could purchase or even apartments. That doesn't mean that the staff shouldn't go out and try, or even that private sector property owners shouldn't approach the city to see if we can somehow put together a deal. But it is a complicated situation in the sense that you do have existing tenants, and those tenants have to be moved out, as we're doing with the Project Achieve project. The tenants have to be moved out, and then I assume they also have to be given first choice to move back into the rehabbed unit. So it has to be part of our portfolio. So I do agree with Mr. Najarian that it's absolutely worth considering and seeing which is the best, where we get the most bang for the buck, as we always say. On some of the issues pertaining to these policy considerations, I am for sure, in terms of the DRB, I want the Housing Authority to be the final determinant as to whether a project is approved or not. Or, I mean, we're wanting to get affordable housing to people as soon as we possibly can, and so I don't want it to be bogged down in DRB, sort of issues. So I think they should be part of the process, but recommendation only as far as I'm concerned. And yeah, I do want to go for quality, and I do want to go for design, and I don't think that it has to do with spending money. I mean, in terms of design, that is absolutely up to the architect, up to the developer, up to our own team to put together a project that fits well on the site and works within the context of the neighborhood. I do think the multifamily design standards are going to help us in that regard. And then finally, all I can say is I just wish we were doing this years ago in terms of some of the things we're doing to make sure that that our contractors and subcontractors and just a general development community is following the the contract that they agreed on. But I'm sure that now that we have these or when we do have these policies in place, that it's going to make a big difference. I think we'll be absolutely able to monitor much closer and really get a good grasp on what it is that they're doing out there. So those are my comments for the time being. Any comments, Mr. Manukian?
Thank you. I also agree. I would like to hear from the public, actually, before I make any comments. But I also agree with Mr. Najarian in terms of rehabilitating any existing housing. But I would like to throw a wild idea out there again, and that's what are the ramifications of completely eliminating affordable housing projects in the city? I think that the city of Glendale and many other cities have had very terrible experiences with affordable housing developers and projects, and I can think of only one developer, and that's Habitat for Humanity, that has always come through with flying colors, and I've always been in favor of their projects, and I will continue to be in favor of their projects. But considering the budget issues that we're facing in terms of the city, I would like to know what are the ramifications of completely eliminating, if not completely, but the majority of the housing projects of affordable housing in the city, and what would that entail, and how do we generate any savings from it for our budget?
Mr. Starburn.
Just very quickly, Mr. Manukian asked me this question earlier today, and I gave him a bit of bad information, incorrect information to an extent. When you form a redevelopment agency and create a project area that generates tax increment, you're obligated to set aside 20% of the tax increment for affordable housing. In 1993-94 through AB 1290, there were teeth put in the law because, frankly, many agencies didn't have an interest in meeting their affordable housing obligations. And so there were some requirements put in the law that put a little bit of teeth in your utilization and use of the 20% set aside. And I had mentioned to Mr. Manukian that you could lose your redevelopment powers by not utilizing your money. That's not entirely correct. You are obligated to look at the amount of money you have in your housing fund. And if you have either $1 million or the equivalent of 4 years of your housing set aside in your housing fund, you're deemed to be in excess surplus condition. And once in an excess surplus condition for a year, which gets you to the 5th year that I had mentioned for a year, then the agency has an obligation to either get themselves back in a non-excess surplus condition, or to transfer their funds to either the county or a housing authority that has jurisdiction within your city to develop affordable housing, which in our case would be the county. If that isn't done, then you can eventually, within a 3-year period of time, lose your redevelopment authority until you've gotten yourself back in the good graces of the state by the expenditure of your funds. You're assigned an additional penalty in that case, though, that you have to add an additional 50% obligation on the funds that you utilize for affordable housing. So you can essentially lose your redevelopment power.
I understand, and that's just an idea that I wanted to throw out there. And going through this PowerPoint, again, we come up with administrative costs when we're dealing with additional, I call it red tape. As Mr. Najarian was saying, they hire a CPA. We hire a CPA to check their CPAs, and then the county will hire more CPAs to check our CPAs, to check their CPAs. So it becomes a merry-go-round that we're kind of going around, and it's great. We have all this controls, but we thought we had controls before, and those controls didn't work. And as you said, there are no guarantees that these would work. But what we're doing is we're generating more staffing costs, in my opinion, and I would like to avoid that at any cost at this point. So additional staffing, that's what I mean. So I'm in favor of just selecting just one, maybe, developer, and that being Habitat for Humanity, and then the rest deal with the issues as Mr. Najarian has made clear.
If I can, there's a second part to my answer to your question, which is far less technical and one more public policy, and that's really one for all of you. You all know the implications, the need for affordable housing in the community. As the staff report notes very generally, we have provided hundreds, if not thousands, of affordable units. You have a waiting list in the community for Section 8, which is some reflection of the affordable housing needs in the community, that is thousands of people that likely we will never meet all of their needs. So the question that Mr. Mnookin raises is really a very foundational question for the Housing Authority and the City Council, and that is the value of our being engaged in affordable housing programs and its development here in Glendale. I think
Or how much of it?
And how much of it? No, I completely agree. If you're going to be in affordable housing development, however, I think whether you're purchasing existing or you're constructing new, what the guidelines reflect, the policy guidelines reflect, is it is a very complex business to be in, especially if it involves tax credits through the state or HUD funding of some type. You have obligations to manage these programs. They're very complex housing structures. I mean, frankly, they're more complex than commercial redevelopment projects, far more complex. They take a level of expertise, they take management, you have obligations for affordability that go on far beyond the decisions that are made here. They run with the project area, they last for decades, where you're obligated to enforce your affordability covenants on these projects that are created. That means you've got to have a staff there to do that, because you've got obligations to the tenants, you've got obligations.
But we already have staff. And we don't really have any housing projects.
And we're not recommending that you add more staff.
Okay.
Again, we were asked to come back to you with a set of controls that we feel would help us to better prevent the kind of situation that arose with ADI. And as I'll repeat again, we are not alone with ADI. There are federal, state, and other housing authorities that have far more staff than we do, and some would argue more expertise than we do, that are sitting there with us in this whole ADI situation. This is staff's best take on, if you want to have the best chance of preventing it and you want to use this opportunity to implement best standards in the way we manage new construction, we think this is the way to do it. We don't think it's going to be overly burdensome on the staff. You may hear from some developers who may feel this is overly burdensome. My personal view, if a developer feels this is overly burdensome, then we shouldn't be dealing with them. Because quality developers can meet these obligations, they can provide you with the information, and I think quality developers will provide you with a product that you want at a reasonable cost. Those who can't, those who say we don't have time, those who say there's too much pressure, my personal professional view is you shouldn't be dealing with them. That's the bottom line. You're going to be doing affordable housing, you need these kinds of guidelines to guide you. I also agree it is entirely about design. Good design is critical. Land use entitlements and putting these projects where they will best serve the community is critical. These kinds of guidelines are not going to put additional burden on staff necessarily. It's the kinds of things we should be doing. You may hear from developers they put pressures on them and they might prefer to not have to meet them. Again, I'll repeat, I don't think we should be dealing with developers who find these to be a burden.
Any other authority? Mr. Weaver.
Yeah. Well, when all the fiasco with ADI started, council sat here and said we needed better controls. It isn't a bias. We asked for this specific issue to be addressed. I'm with Mr. Starbird. Developers can't afford to provide this. We shouldn't be doing business with them. 14 years I've sat here, affordable housing has been a very important element of this city. To now turn off the spigot and say no more affordable housing, I think we'll have these council chambers packed with people looking for housing. We owe it to them. The cost of building great structures, quality construction, you get what you pay for. If you're asking for high quality materials and fixtures and everything in, it's going to cost more. Maybe the developer can't afford it. So you got to be careful on how much you're asking a developer come. You've got to weigh that against, do you want the affordable units? I accept these 8 recommendations. I think we have to do it. If you, down the line, we want to talk about buying old apartment buildings or whatever and rehabbing them, fine. But the first question I'm going to ask, since they're old, they have to be rehabbed, I'll bet you the parking requirements on those structures are totally antiquated. And where are you going to find the parking after you rehabbed them? Or are we going to be sitting here granting variances for parking on every old unit that gets rehabbed? That's just one issue. Sure, let's investigate it. Let's have study sessions up here. But this is directly the result of ADI, new affordable housing, and we as a collective body months ago said we wanted new guidelines here, tougher. It's too bad we had to go there, but all it takes is one bad seed to trigger it. Now we're stuck in making sure that it doesn't happen again, as much as we can. And as you know on computers, for every time they come up with a way to avoid the hackers find another way around. So I presume we'll put all this in, and eventually somebody will find a way to get around this too. We can only do so much, but we owe it to the public to do just this. So I fully support it. If you want to talk about rehabs later, sure, let's talk. Thank you.
Okay, Ms. Parazian, did you have any comments at this point?
Just have a question.
Yeah.
On the policy consideration 2, what do you mean by small development? How small would that be?
Policy consideration number 2,
2, yeah.
with regards to
Small development.
findings of fact for sole source determinations by the authority. The examples that I cited in the report would be Habitat for Humanity type projects, typically 10, 11 units or less. Projects, those types of projects are more difficult to finance in terms of new construction. Habitat seems to be able to have worked a model where they're able to do something along those scales, that scale.
Okay, I have one card from the public. If anyone else wishes to speak, fill out a card. The speaker is Herbert Milano.
Good afternoon. My name is Herbert Milano. I want to commend the Housing Authority for taking this on, this significant problem and addressing it. I have a few questions and a few comments with regard to some of the options that were presented. I'm very much aligned with Mr. Najarian with his concept of evaluating whether to build or to buy. I think it's a great idea to have that included as part of the decision-making process. Is there any other company that is about to undergo a major task? Do we build or do we buy? I also like the idea of Mr. Manukian in addressing the issue of thinking completely out of the box. If these are requirements that are imposed to the redevelopment agency, why not approach the state in a sort of like a sharing basis to see if maybe they'll allow some of the money to use for Section 8? I don't know if it's even possible, but it's an idea that is worth pursuing because it does maintain at least some control with regard to the density issues and parking that are usually these new developments bring. I'd like to see a definitive maximum ceiling with regard to a cost per square foot or a cost per unit. I've seen in the last 5 years, since 2005, at least with ADI, projects that went from $320,000 per unit to over $530,000 per unit. I'd like to see a minimum percentage of investment by these entities. As I looked at these documents, I'm astonished at how little investment basically the developer is putting into this and how much subsidy there is. I like to see a little bit more specification on the ownership of the land after a set period, or the ground lease as a better option. I like to see a guidelines with regard to the history of the developer, especially on the previous projects with regard to the number of change orders that they presented, or the percentage of the total cost of development, meaning the percentage of change orders to the overall total cost of development, as well as what was presented, a thorough overview of any prior lawsuits to which that developer has been subjected. I'd also like to include considerations on the availability of adequate parkland for that particular neighborhood where these projects are being proposed. I'd like to see a clear clarification of the computation of the expected tenant subsidy over 20 years. If you give $500 a month, it turns out to be $120,000 over that period. I'd like to see more specific and definitive requirements with regard to parking. Mr. Weaver presented an idea way before concerning putting like 1.5 parking spaces per unit. I'd like to see a floor established so that not so many variances, being submitted towards the tail end. I have more comments if I would be given a lot more time. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. All right, are there any final comments from the authority?
I do.
Mr. Najarian.
I know Mr. Mnookin wasn't with us for the past year, but one of the things that got me thinking, but in the past year, the particular most recent Habitat project came up, and the cost per unit subsidy of the city was over $500,000. Now there was per unit. Now there was gardens involved, and there was this, and there was that, but I just wanted to inform you of that with Habitat, I think.
Thank you. I did not realize that.
I think a better management, but the cost issues still sometimes can get out of hand.
And it should be looked at.
Well, but Mr. Mnookin's defense.
Thank you. Since I was not
Not
here.
that he needs any, but the issue with Habitat is, and what I particularly like about it, is the volunteer aspect of it, meaning that the people that own those homes, number one, go there and work and build their homes. So there's
Sweat equity, yeah.
lots of sweat equity involved. And then, in fact, they're capped in terms of they can't go there and move into the house, and 2 years later, 3 years later, they move out and have a great profit that they made. It doesn't work that way. And so, I'm a big believer in Habitat for Humanity. The more we work with Habitat for Humanity, the better off we are, period.
Let me ask one question, Mr. Starbird or Mr. Peter or Mr. Fortney. The money that we get for housing, are we required to, are we restricted from giving that as a rent subsidy to families in a rent subsidy program? Do we have to actually go out there and own or purchase or obtain a housing unit? Can we give a rent subsidy such as a Section 8 type of program?
There's an expectation in the redevelopment code that new housing, both as it relates to the use of set-aside funds, the housing element, things along those lines, that new housing actually be created. So what you're looking at trying to achieve is a balance of affordable housing programs where there's some new construction, there's some rehabilitation that's going on with the single-family and multifamily rehab program, there's some first-time home buyer, and we do have elements of a rental assistance program under VET WRAP and Life WRAP. Limited amount of funding, but we do have some component of rental assistance that set aside is contributing to. But the expectation at the state level as it relates to the entire process would be new constructions being created.
If I can comment further, you have some technical obligations for the production of units. For example, your inclusionary housing obligations when market rate housing is built in your project area. You have certain obligations to produce affordable housing. Numbers of units has to be representative of your income levels in the community. You get certain credit mixes depending on whether you develop that in the project area or outside the project area. But I'll emphasize what Peter has noted. At the state level and among the housing advocates, the expectation is to create, and I don't mean new in the sense of new construction, but to create additional affordable units. They want to see an increase in the inventory of affordable units in a community. That's why the housing advocates, the affordable housing advocates, legislatively generally try to resist any use of housing set-aside funds that doesn't go into the production of affordable units that increases your overall inventory. Now, that doesn't mean you can't, but frankly, 8CD and many of the housing advocates watch very closely what you do. And there is currently legislation in the hopper that will restrict our ability to utilize housing set-aside funds for other purposes. The other thing I'd like to note is Mr. Quintero is correct. Habitat for Humanity is a very different kind of affordable housing developer. They are unlike any other that you'll deal with. It's really not a good example to use Gladys Drive of a habitat project because we placed a lot of constraints on that. We bought a piece of property that had zoning for a good number of units, then we downsized the number of units that would go on it, but we were having to buy it based on its value for what they could develop it at. And then we took almost half of it and said you can't use this half for housing because we're going to have a community gardens. That's what began to drive the numbers up. Probably a more fair representation is the Kenwood project, which is one of the largest habitat projects Habitat's ever undertaken at, I think, 11 units. I mean, it's not big by housing standards, but it's big for them.
That was before 2007 they started, right?
Yeah, I think so.
Fundraising and things along those lines, yes.
Yeah, that's a very, that's also
Subterranean
a bit of a
parking.
unique kind of habitat project, but the projects we did on Pacific is very typical of Habitat.
Right.
They're usually not the easiest kind of sites to develop. They're not ones that some of the larger affordable housing developers will utilize. We always, generally with Habitat, they expect to see more of the single-family cottage kind of development, which is much, much more expensive than denser projects. So, and also Habitat is not eligible for their projects to seek the leveraged financing that you'll see in the larger projects, whether it's the industry money or the 4% tax credits or 9% tax credits. They generally don't. So as a result, you have a greater subsidy on those projects.
You say Gladys Drive, you meant Geneva.
I'm in Geneva.
And that wasn't assistance that went necessarily, or assistance that Habitat requested, as Mr. Starbird mentioned. That was simply the acquisition price of that property that took place years before and authorized by the Housing Authority for a development, for a site that was subject to a 15-unit condominium development. So all the costs associated with Geneva
based on its development potential
were associated with acquisition years before Habitat came in.
Is Habitat always, do they ever do rental projects? Are they all ownership?
No. The only thing they've started to do is to work in between new development homeownership projects to keep their volunteers busy and to keep them active and not lose them in between projects. They've started a rehab type of program, which they're going out and for a low-income homeowner, let's say an elderly person who can't maintain the repairs to their home, they're doing a little rehab program.
So that's the other question. If we were to only go with a Habitat, we would be saying we're not building any more affordable rental projects. It would only be home ownership, which tends to be more moderate income, right? I mean, you don't do low income.
Well, Habitat's the only model that does the low-income home ownership.
But it's a very
at that
small
level.
amount of people that they serve.
And just to address the one comment made by a member of the public with regards to a maximum ceiling cost per unit, we thought about that, we discussed it. We didn't feel that that was necessarily appropriate to recommend, only because that there are so many projects out there that you can point to where the maximum ceiling or the requested assistance might be higher for the maximum ceiling, but they might be warranted. So, for instance, I could think of the United Cerebral Palsy Project that, for the most part, involved some heavy costs associated with acquisition of the substandard buildings that were located there and relocation of the existing tenants. If we were to implement a maximum ceiling on a cost per unit, a project like that's not only providing affordable housing, but accomplishing something else in the neighborhood in terms of neighborhood revitalization. It's saving costs to the city on police, fire, code enforcement responses in the future by eliminating that blight. There are some projects that might warrant investment over a maximum ceiling cost per unit. So we chose to leave that recommendation out and just analyze the projects on a project-by-project basis.
All right, thank you. We have to move on.
Mr. Quintero?
Someone, Mr. Weaver.
I'd like to move 6A1 with the additional wording that Mr. Quintero suggested to balance the quality. Remember, Mr. Starbird, the wording that you had, balancing the quality.
Want to reread it?
If you wrote it
I
down,
telepathically asked Michael to be working with language.
Can't remember the
Just to
words.
add to the end of Section 7 on design review, to add a sentence saying, prior to bringing a project before the Design Review Board, Redevelopment Agency, and Housing Authority, community development staff shall review and provide a report with recommendations to ensure the highest quality design and construction to meet community expectations, balanced with project cost considerations.
Yeah, that's my motion.
Second.
I would still like to see something in there about evaluating the developers themselves based on their track record.
I think we have that in there.
that's already in there.
That's already
in there.
part of the criteria.
It's part of the due diligence checklist, sort of their experience, their projects, that sort of thing. So it's already in there.
Including references and all of that.
Mr. Najarian.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to propose an amendment that the resolution be modified to clearly indicate that that the discussion of housing projects and selection of housing projects excludes specifically the option to purchase pre-existing and already built housing. The way we refer to projects in here is vague, and it may arguably apply to to my proposal that we evaluate existing housing.
Okay.
If you want to put new projects, new construction, and if that's modified as such, I can support it. But otherwise, it's vague, and it.
Section 8 would just need to be reviewed. Right now, it applies to new construction or, again, substantial rehab. So it would only apply where the after rehab value of the project, the rehabilitation cost exceeds 25% of the after rehab value of the project, including land value. So it's going to be a high number, but we were trying.
What if you buy a project that's just come on the market? It's brand new. Here's an apartment building.
It wouldn't apply.
This would not apply to
No,
that.
because you're not engaging in substantial rehabilitation.
You
No
have
rehab in your example.
The limit is substantial rehab, and that's a fairly high bar at the 25% level.
Yeah, especially when you include land value, it's going to be a really high number. Yeah, it's on Section 8.
It's on Section 8. It's a quick read.
I would think that we should have all of the same criteria apply to substantial rehabs. I wouldn't support it if it didn't.
At the end of the
resolution, page 8. Section 8, page 8.
Yeah, just.
Okay.
I withdraw my amendment with the comment that I hope that we do not forget about, I think, an interest expressed by at least 3 members of this agency, that we develop some sort of process and procedure with equal dignity that is presented to the resolution before us, that we can incorporate as our official policy.
Who are the 3? Because I support the same thing.
Oh, I didn't hear you say
But
support.
when we had the discussion before,
I was counting. I forgot before. That was then.
Too long ago?
This is now.
All right.
Let's say several.
Want to ask the matter to come back on the agenda?
No, I'd like the same thing that we've just presented, with the same effort that staff has put into new projects.
My question is, do you want that to come back on the
That in
agenda?
particular, yes. Not this entire
No, but
project.
the same approach with
Yes.
respect to, was there a second to confirm?
Our second person interested, Mr. Mincy is interested. All right, we have a motion and a second. Roll call, please.
Authority members, Friedman,
yes.
Nukian,
I will vote no on this because I believe that it will increase the costs to the taxpayers. Therefore, I will vote no on it.
Incy,
Yes.
Najarian,
Yes.
Brazian,
Yes.
Weaver,
Aye.
Chair Quintero.
Yes. Okay, before we move to 6B, let's just take a quick 5-minute recess so we can find out technically what's going on with this. All right, we are back in session. Mr. Kasakian, will you please read the 6B into the...
6B is Director of Community Development regarding consideration and prioritization of current affordable housing opportunities. At B1 is motion providing direction to staff.
Mr. Starbird.
Yes, I will go again to Peter Zovak.
Mr. Chair, members of the Housing Authority, we do have another PowerPoint presentation here for you. If it starts to get long, please let me know, and I'll try and move things along a little bit quicker. We've handed out the PowerPoint to the Housing Authority. We have additional copies available here for any members of the public, as well as with the previous PowerPoint presentation. But in this particular item, staff is seeking Housing Authority input on the prioritization of future affordable housing development opportunities within the city. Over the last year, community development staff has been meeting with developers interested in developing affordable housing in Glendale. To date, staff has met with approximately 24 developers in response to the Housing Authority's issuance of a statement of interest a little over close to a year and a half ago. Statement of interest was issued out by the authority, and as a result, staff has met with these 24 developers. Most of those developers have expressed a general interest in developing in Glendale. They've provided general information about their companies, and they've asked that they be placed on an interest list in the event that the Housing Authority were to issue any future RFP or RFQ for any Housing Authority-owned sites. They didn't necessarily have land to bring to a proposal or an actual development proposal, but said, I have a general interest in developing in Glendale. Please keep me on an interest list for any future RFPs. However, of those 24 developers, there have been, and staff has received, 6 proposals that have gone further, and they are proposals that, as a carryover from the previous discussion, we're calling over-the-counter proposals for Housing Authority consideration and direction today. In addition to receiving input and meeting with developers and evaluating proposals, the Housing Authority has actively pursued development opportunities via the direct acquisition of property, as in the case of the previously discussed Fifth and Sonora property acquired by the Housing Authority back in August of 2008. And finally, the Housing Authority is in the process of acquiring a second site. The site is known as the 327 through 331 West Salem site. That was intended to be developed as affordable housing, having received project entitlements and funding reservations. However, the developer has defaulted on that proposal, and the authority is taking steps to acquire the land from the developer in lieu of the land acquisition loan given to the developer. Given the opportunities that exist right now for development, community development staff seeks the Housing Authority direction as to how best to proceed given the Housing Authority-owned property and soon-to-be-owned property at Salem, and given the over-the-counter proposals that have been received as a result of the statement of interest. We are asking Housing Authority consideration, and Artie, if we can go to one more. Consideration of these proposals given a number of different factors that may affect your decision. First and foremost, the Housing Authority's interest in any of the proposals that have been submitted. Your interest can range from liking the location, interested in the development team that's being proposed, population that's going to be served, things along those lines, and balancing that out with a number of other factors that are weighing in on decisions here. The second one being the State of California proposed action to eliminate redevelopment. As you are aware, most of you are aware, is that for the last few months the State of California has proposed eliminating redevelopment, and that includes affordable housing development. The action they propose would allow the Housing Authority to expend its funding currently within its accounts, but from next year forward not be able to develop not to receive any future affordable housing funds. At the same time, with regards to the State of California, there's an alternative proposal that's being circulated to the state proposal. It's being circulated by the Community Redevelopment Association. And it calls for a different action. Rather than eliminate redevelopment of affordable housing forever, it would allow cities to contribute 1 year's worth of affordable housing funding, all the increment received for that purpose, to the State of California, in lieu of having 2 years extended on the end of the development plan to receive additional funding for affordable housing development, as well as some other elements. So for the purposes of today's discussion, there are two interactions going on at the state level. It's either the state elimination of redevelopment or the CRA alternative. In either event, it affects next year's funding for affordable housing. The third item would be with regards to home funds. As we mentioned previously, there's a site that was subject to a previous development, 327 through 331 West Salem. It was entitled, it was subject to a letter of loan commitment, and funding was obtained for the project on different levels. That project is now in default. In its immediate future, there is no project proposed for that location anymore. The Housing Authority, when they invested funding into that project, invested a considerable amount of home funds into the project. It was home qualified. As a result of the default in the Housing Authority soon to be taking back the land, there's approximately $3.1 million in home funds that must then be allocated to another project, and another qualifying project by July 31st, 2011, or suffer de-obligation. And then finally, the Housing Authority's limited resources. There certainly is not enough funding to support all the projects that are been proposed, so there needs to be some type of decision-making process going on to select the appropriate projects for development. In terms of how much funding is available, again, we're looking at current year's funding. All future year funding is in question right now at the state level. So currently we have approximately $7.3 million in redevelopment set-aside funds. We have approximately $4.7 million in federal home funds. That 4.7 includes the obligation to the Salem project that would be working its way back into the pot. And then there are bond proceeds associated with the recently issued redevelopment central project area tax allocation bond. Bond proceeds in the amount of $7.4 million. So there's a total of $19.4 million available this current funding year. And if you recall, there are two pots of money we are dealing with: redevelopment set aside. The other is federal home funding. Effective July 1st, we'll see a new allocation of home funding, approximately $2 million. So in total, there's $21.46 million available for consideration. Now, due to the situation going on at the state level, staff took a look at if there are affordable housing projects moving forward for next year, how we would be able to support those projects given either one of the circumstances in which funding for next year may be taken away, either through the state or through an alternative by the CRA. So we took a look at operations, funding operations for next fiscal year, and prioritized three items for next year that we feel should be reserved out of that pot of money of $21.4 million set aside and dedicated to these three proposals here. First and foremost, because of the new bond proceeds that have been issued, there will be bond debt in 2011. So we're recommending allocating $422,000 to that. There's also, in association with the Vassar City Lights project, there is a loan that was taken out by the Housing Authority and Union Bank of California, $14 million loan. There's annual debt service on that project of $3 million. And then we looked at next year's a minimum number for operations, programs, administration for next year, and came out with $3.2 million. So for a total of approximately $6.7 million of funding reservations we would want to make from that pot of money of $21.4 million. As a result, that would leave approximately Sure.
The bond debt service for 2011, that's the most recent bond that was issued from the redevelopment agency? Is that
correct? Earlier this month, I believe? Yes.
Thank you.
So once you take out that 2011-2012 operations reservation of $6.7 million from the 21.4, we have remaining funding available for development at $14.7 million. As we mentioned earlier, the affordable housing opportunities. Correct. As we mentioned earlier, the housing opportunities consist of the Housing Authority-owned site. Currently, the Housing Authority is in possession of 5th and Sonora. Housing Authority is in the process of acquiring Salem. There are 24 developers who have responded to a statement of interest. 6 have submitted actual over-the-counter proposals.
Do we have prices attached to those properties?
Prices attached to which properties?
How much would we buy Fifth and Sonora for?
Fifth and Sonora was purchased for $6 million.
Salem?
Salem, the outstanding loan on land acquisition loan on that property is $1.1 million, if I'm not mistaken.
Is that correct?
That's correct.
So, Fifth and Sonora is $5 million?
6.
6. And Salem is 1.1?
1.064 to be exact, of outstanding debt on the land acquisition loan that was provided.
Okay. That's exact, 1.064.
Exact.
Thank you.
I hope. Yes, it is. Then here's that slide. Fifth and Sonora, purchased for $6 million in 2008. It's approximately 1.67 acres. Development potential of approximately 56 units. I know some of the Housing Authority members have seen this. Housing Authority member Manukian, this might be the first time you've seen this. When we say Fifth and Sonora,
Sorry, I
that's-
didn't...
others might have... Okay. Other Housing Authority members are familiar with this property.
Okay.
You may not be. For your reference, Fifth and Sonora represents the area of land outlined in yellow. Do we have a pointer too? It is. It is. Most of the property was under one ownership. Actually, all of the property was under one ownership. I'll have to hold it down. Very good. Just to give you a little orientation, the old Bob's Big Boy that used to be located on Glen Oaks, right here. This is Glen Oaks Avenue. This is Sonora. This is Fifth. And as a result, we call it the Fifth and Sonora property. Most of the property is vacant. Has been vacant for quite a while. It's just 4 units here and a single-family unit right here, in addition to this parking. This parking is not associated with this building. This parking is tied to the remaining property acquired by the Housing Authority. Okay, next. As we mentioned, the 327, 331 West Salem property, previously committed funds for a 36-unit development. The authority is in the process of acquiring the land. The developer's default has created an urgent need to reinvest approximately $3.1 million in home funds as a result of this project not moving forward. And for your benefit as well, this is the subject property here, Salem.
ADI property?
Correct. This is ADI property project proposal number 5. Central City Lights is what it was called. It's located on Salem, central here. Consists of a city-owned parking lot and then a...
This is not held up in courts and litigation?
This is the one that
The
we're
property
currently...
is not held up in litigation because of what's going on with ADI?
No, because at this point, the Housing Authority's assistance on this project was simply a land acquisition loan. We had committed more funding, but we didn't have to disperse it yet because the project didn't move forward. So at this point, we have a land acquisition loan out on the property, land acquisition loan at $1.064 million. The property appraised a few months ago at $1.1 million. So our interest is secured by the value of this property right here.
We should address the question of whether it's held up in litigation. It's not part of the larger ADI investigation, but we're having to go through a process in lieu of foreclosure. We may actually have to utilize foreclosure to get the property back. We advanced the money to ADI to purchase the property as a loan. It's secured by the property. So we as yet do not have title to the property.
But it's not...
No, it's not part of the bigger
We have a
ADI
secured
issue.
interest in the property.
Yeah.
That's, as Mr. Starbird noted, we can foreclose to get it. We're trying to get it back through a deed in lieu. The only thing that might potentially cause a problem would be a bankruptcy filing. ADI or its principles.
Okay, and what is the probability of that?
Right now, we don't look at it as high probability. And we're moving as quickly as we can to get the property back.
You might note in the meantime, the parking lot continues to operate as a city parking lot.
And the $1.1 million loan was for the acquisition of this previously privately held property. And then the Housing Authority and the city was going to contribute this city-owned parking lot to the development. Okay. Of the proposals received, over-the-counter proposals, we'll first focus on the Mercy Housing proposal. If you look on your staff report and Table 3, page 5 of the report, Mercy Housing was one of the, virtually the only developer, because of their association and their proposed association with Glendale Memorial Hospital. They initially submitted a number of variations on a proposal, approximately 5 alternatives. Of those 5 alternatives, staff would like to bring to your attention what we're calling Mercy Housing Alternative Number 4, located at the 200 block of West Los Feliz. Calls for the new construction of 48 units. The approximate assistance being requested is about $4 million. It is a home-eligible project. It would make a ideal replacement project for the use of the home funds that were previously designated for Salem. Translates to about $83,000 per unit subsidy. And the developer, through their unique partnership with Glendale Memorial Hospital, the owner-operator, Catholic Healthcare West, developer in this particular case has site control. And for those of you wondering, the proposal is outlined here in yellow. Here's Los Feliz, Central. Here's Glendale Memorial Hospital. So this location is a hospital-owned property located across the street of the main building across Los Feliz. Second proposal is proposed by Ganji Development. It's for 4031 Pennsylvania Avenue, new construction, 53 units. And I should go back and preface that all of these proposals are very preliminary. They've been presented by the developer. They haven't been vetted by staff or the Housing Authority's economic consultant. These numbers could change, could indeed change in the future as we get into further negotiations and discussions with any of them. So these numbers are preliminary. Preliminary request of $10 million, approximately $188,000 per unit. This particular case, the site is owned by the developer, by Ganji Development. A vacant parcel, quite large. This is the 210 freeway here, heading west, Pennsylvania Avenue, Altura. So it's this area of land here that's being proposed by Ganji. Next we have the AmCal YMCA Davila proposal. It's for property owned by the YMCA off of Kenwood and Wilson. Calls for the construction of 78 units, approximate $7.8 million initial request. Translates to about $100,000 per unit. This particular case, because of the relationship with the YMCA into the proposal, they're also the landowner. And here it is in relation to the entire Y operations. You have the old historic SRO building here. You have the fitness facility for the Y here. This is not part of the Y. This is a privately held apartment building. This is all controlled by the YMCA. It's the YMCA parking and 2 residential buildings that were acquired by the YMCA, I want to say 6 to maybe 8 years ago for a different proposal at that time that didn't materialize. So the YMCA proposal will be for this site here, owned by the Y and adjacent to their existing facilities. There's also a proposal by Path Ventures, Urban Pacific, a partnership. It's located at 1251 South Glendale Avenue, includes 1246 South Maryland. Calls for new construction of 21 units, approximately $2.5 million request, about $119,000 a unit. The developer has site control in this particular situation via a purchase contract. The property is for sale. The developer has put in an offer on the property and is controlling it through that acquisition purchase offer. The site is the former New Horizons site. This was a location that was going to be developed by the social service agency New Horizons. It's part of an expanded and brand new daycare service and programming. That project is off the books, will not be happening, and New Horizons is trying to sell the property. Thus, this particular developer came in and obtained is in escrow to purchase the property subject to a housing authority approval. Next proposal is being
Didn't we
proposed
have
by...
a lien on that property, too?
I'm sorry?
Didn't we have a purchase?
Oh, yes, thank you. You can go back, Mike, please. This property was previously, as I stated, previously subject to a development proposal with New Horizons. New Horizons obtained CDBG funding from the city, approximately $280,000, to help with the development of what they were proposing at that time. Because the New Horizons is no longer in existence and the project has gone away, there's a $280,000 CDBG loan that exists on this property. It's in second position. It's behind a first trust deed, a bank loan. I want to say that...
I thought the city's loan was larger
No,
than
it's
$280,000.
$280,000 in outstanding CDBG assistance.
It's 280?
There's a first trust deed on this property with the bank. I believe the number is approximately $890,000. And the property was appraised. Forgive me for looking this up. The appraised value 6 months ago was approximately $1.4 million, is the notation I get from CDBG staff. Okay. Next we have Safran and Associates. Safran and Associates proposing a project at 225 East Garfield Avenue. It calls for an acquisition rehabilitation model of this project, so it's not new construction. 30 units, approximately $5.5 billion request, translates to approximately $183,000. In this particular case, the developer, as of the writing of this report, does not have site control for the parcel, and it's an old pictometry aerial, so this large open space is now occupied by Garfield and Gardens, the brand new project that opened up about 4 or 5 months ago, 24 units. This is the property next door, 225 East Garfield Avenue. This is in the Garfield neighborhood. Garfield, Central Avenue here, Enterprise, Rent-A-Car on the corner, the infamous H Alley right here, and a future city mini park in this location here. So, as I said, it's not in, there's no site control on the property. It's not being offered for sale. It's strictly a proposal that the developer has put together on this parcel. There have been attempts by the Housing Authority, City Council in the past to acquire this property. I want to say some 10 years ago. At that time, the property owner was not a willing seller. So we would
I thought you said the developer does not have site control.
Correct.
Who owns the property again?
Private,
Not the
private
developer.
owner, yes. Private owner.
They're willing to deal with affordable housing issues? And they're willing to sell?
No, they've given no indication as to whether or not they'll be willing to sell. And if they were, what price they would provide. So the developer had to go with an estimate as to what they felt the value of this property was. Any future proposal would require the willingness of this property owner to sell to the developer to make this project happen. So as a result, there's not necessarily site control here, and there may never be site control, and if not a willing seller, ultimately, if the Housing Authority were to want to continue this, then they would have to consider other means to acquire it. Finally, we have the Path Achieve project. And I apologize, in the report we mentioned that Path Achieve was associated with one of the previous proposals, Path Ventures. They were. Effective January 1st, they did separate. They just haven't changed their name yet. So not to confuse this with the Path Ventures proposal on the New Horizons site, we have Path Achieve. This is also an acquisition rehab model. It's for 9 units that Path Achieve and S.Ho. Hope have acquired at 1911 Gardena Avenue. They're looking for approximately $200,000 in home funding for rehabilitation, approximately $22,000 a unit, and the developer has already taken down the property. And it's this location right here, along Vassar, and just down the street from the proposed new homeless shelter located right around here. So what you have is the following proposals, requests. 5th and Sonora, at what staff is putting down for now at $2.5 million. You have Path Achieve SO Hope at $200,000, Mercy Housing Alternative 4 at $400,000, YMCA at the $7.8 million requested, Ganji Development at a preliminary $10 million, Saffron and Associates $5.5 million, and the Urban Pacific Path Adventures proposal at $2.5 million. In analyzing the projects, the proposals, taking into consideration some of the constraints that we're up against, staff recommendations would be to start the process for issuing an RFQ for the 5th and Sonora site. It's a property that the Housing Authority has owned for going on 3 years now. An RFP process that were to start now would coincide with the need to be able to develop this property and subject it to a disposition and development agreement by the next 2 years. Staff is asking for a preliminary reservation of approximately $2.5 million to be able to move forward on 5th and Sonora and starting that process. If the Housing Authority were to approve that, we would anticipate coming back sometime in May with the parameters for seeking parameters for issuance of this RFQ by the Housing Authority. We did have some initial discussions with the authority over the summer, and we'd want to continue those discussions. Staff would also recommend pursuing the Path Achieve proposal. That's the 9-unit, $200,000 acquisition rehab proposal. Small enough number to be able to absorb. It is a project that is moving along. It has some leverage funding sources from HUD, from the city through CDBG. Staff would also recommend pursuing the Mercy Housing Alternative Number 4 proposal. That proposal represents a number of things that staff finds is in support of. For one is the unique relationship that Mercy Housing has proposed for this particular proposal. As we mentioned earlier, it involves Mercy, which is a nationally recognized affordable housing developer with offices here in Los Angeles. It represents a partnership with Glendale Memorial Hospital and through their parent organization, Catholic Healthcare West. And it also represents a partnership with New Directions, which is a well-known and established social service provider for veterans, because their proposal, and a number of these proposals are all veteran proposals. And then we ask Housing Authority assistance in prioritizing the remaining proposals given the remaining funding if the authority were to accept these first 3 recommendations. If that were the case, you have the $14.7 million previously discussed. You have a reservation of Path Achieve for $200,000, a prelim reservation of $2.5 million for 5th and Sonora, and then the Mercy Alternative 4 proposal at $4 million, bringing that total to $6.7 million, leaving a balance of $8 million. And those remaining projects that fall are these 4 here, the YMCA at 7.8, Ganji Development at 10, Saffron Associates at 5.5, Urban Pacific Path Adventures at 2.5. The Housing Authority could choose to allocate the remaining $8 million in a manner that virtually utilizes the $8 million up. They could look at a proposal that might be over the $8 million allotment and ask staff to go back and see if it could fit the $8 million remaining amount. The authority can elect to reserve some funding for some of the smaller projects, and then with the remaining balance available, maybe pursue the discussion that we had earlier on acquisition rehab, that whole model discussed earlier. And that would be it. That'd be staff's presentation. I know that there are a number of not all of the 6 over-the-counter developers here today. I know a number of cards have been submitted. So if there are no questions on this.
Any questions at this point?
No, but I would like to reiterate that I want these PowerPoints earlier. Please, a couple of days earlier so I can do some research on them before I come in here.
We'll try.
Thank you.
All right. We will start with John Malloy, followed by Jim Wilkie.
Mr. Chair, Mr. City Manager, members of the authority, My name is John Malloy. I'm the Executive Director of Path Ventures. We're a 501c3 nonprofit that is devoted exclusively to the development and provision of long-term affordable housing and supportive housing. We're very proud of our developments, and we try to build as much in the way of permanent support for the tenants that are selected to occupy our projects as we can. We're a cousin of Path Achieve Glendale. We both originated with the PATH organization in Los Angeles years ago, and PATH formed Path Ventures specifically for the purpose of developing new permanent affordable housing, some of which is for the formerly homeless, but by no means exclusively. We try to build support services into our projects to the extent we can. We wanted to thank the staff. They were very, very forthcoming on where we fit within their vision of the priorities here in Glendale, but we did want to provide the authority with another option. We are trying to do a small project. We like the smaller projects. We have an existing relationship with the City of Glendale, and that Path Ventures is your contractor for the provision of scattered site affordable housing in Glendale through your Community Services Department now. We like working with the city, and we wanted to come over and try to provide you with an interesting option. We're trying to develop a project that I think would be best focused on the veteran community. We're going to do a small 1 and 2 bedroom, a few 2 bedrooms, but mostly 1 bedroom, 21 units on this site. The city does have a existing deed of trust which would be paid off when the site is acquired from its existing owner. We paid what I thought was a substantial amount to get the option on this property, and we have that for the purposes of presenting this opportunity to you. We are a so-called CHODO organization, which has a special standing under the home funds, and we'd be glad to work with the staff to accept home funds on this project. We also have a special relationship with the Corporation for Supportive Housing, and if the city has other priorities this year but could put us on a affirmative wait list or was able to work financing for our project into your agenda next year or even the year after, we would be willing to look at consummating the purchase of this property and dealing with you in a subsequent year. We know that your prioritization process is tough, but we'd love to work with the staff to figure out a way to do this. We know we'd have to go for City of Industry funds as well as perhaps the multifamily housing program at the state, assuming it's reopened after the state deals with its current financial crisis. But we'd be looking for about $2.5 million from the city on this, and that is inclusive of the $300,000 plus or minus that you already have on this property.
Okay. Actually, before you sit down, I'm going to have a couple of questions. So rather than have you come up, let me quickly ask you, what did you say that you have some, in a sense, vouchers that you're already working with our...
Yeah, we have a contract now with the city, Path Ventures does, through the Community Services Department, and we lease 13 scattered site units in the city of Glendale for provision of housing to the formerly homeless.
Okay, and then the next question I have, what is CHODO?
A CHODO is a special organization, a community-based housing development organization that a portion of your home funds have to be spent on CHODOs. And in order to be a CHODO, you have to have community basis for your board of directors and certain rules and restrictions that set you aside. As a 501c3 nonprofit, we are a CHODO, and we could qualify for that special subset of home funds that has to be placed through that mechanism. I think the staff can.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much. Next is All right. Thank you, sir. Next is Jim Wilkie, followed by George Isayans.
Chairman Quintero, members of the Housing Authority, I'm Jim Wilkie, a Glendale resident and a member of the Glendale YMCA board. I'm here to pitch our project, $7.8 million for 78 units on the property that Glendale Y owns. We're looking at it from the standpoint of the funding and programming it's going to allow the Y to continue to proceed with. Everything from our swimming programs for youth up through the Silver Sneakers program that we have for the older folks like my soon-to-be self when I turn 65. Also, the community outreach that the Y participates in, we do everything from after-school care for youth, all the way up through babysitting for our members as they come to participate at the Y. That will all be incorporated into and help us be funded through this project. The other aspect of it that we're really interested in is the veterans housing aspect. We want to set aside working with AmCal, our developer, and our lead development partner to coordinate with both the Y and AmCal to go out and find veterans that can qualify and stay and live in our housing. We think it's going to be a win both for the Y, it's going to be a win for the city, because we're going to be giving back whatever we get out of it back into the city through our programs and our projects that we do and our interactions with the city, not only from the police to the fire, as well as the library, every other organization, the school district that we partner with currently. So we're really anxious to have you give us very serious consideration and make the Y project your top priority. Thank you.
Thank you. George Isayans, followed by Herbert Milano.
Good afternoon, Chairman Quintero and members of Housing Authority, City Manager, and City Attorney. My name is George Isayans. I'm a resident of Glendale, and I've been a board member of Glendale YMCA for more than 15 years. And I've been working on this project from day one, and that goes back 9 years ago. I'm sure every project that you have here before you, it's worthy and well-planned project providing badly needed affordable housing. However, our project is different simply because it's part of the city's fabric. This is a partnership between Glendale YMCA and the City of Glendale and the community. This is not just another affordable housing. This is a lot more. Obviously, providing affordable housing for our elderly and veteran is an important part of our project. But this project also provides badly needed capital for Glendale YMCA to renovate its old and outdated facility in order to provide state-of-the-art gym for its members, additional parking for its members, renovate its historical building, and continue its social programs for its members, children, and underprivileged families. Our facility is located in the heart of Glendale, walking distance to the post office, City Hall, police station, courthouse, Americana, Galleria, and easy access to medical facilities. I think all of you have an exceptional opportunity to make this project a reality and let it transform into a magical entity that will provide for so many and continue providing its numerous social services for all ages. We need your support, your approval, and Glendale YMCA needs this to become a reality now. Thank you.
Thank you. Herbert Milano, followed by Mark Ganji.
I'd like to ask that some of the visuals be presented up. My name is Herbert Milano. I appreciate the opportunity to ask a couple of questions. I have two of them. The first one is a question that I hope the agency will ask the staff concerning the $14 million that remains out of the loan that the city obtained, and what happens if the redevelopment agency goes away, what happens to the city's debt obligation on the remaining of those $14 million. The other question regards the YMCA property and the development for those 78 units. That is, although I appreciate the contributions that the YMCA has given to the city and to many residents, if I could have a picture of that up there, I would appreciate it, because this building happens to be about a block away from mine, and I know this area fairly well. And if you please notice, this is a recreational planning area 10, the one that has the least amount of parkland per 1,000 residents. It's 0.017 acres per 1,000. If you notice the building immediately north of that, if you ever seen a building that has zero setbacks in the city of Glendale, that building has less than zero setback. Actually, part of the building overextends its property line. I don't know how the building got approved, but now we are basically coming in with another high-density area and building that, even though it has its lofty purposes, it overtaxes the overall requirements that this particular area needs for open space and open parkland. If you notice on the top of the building of the YMCA, there's a track. I've used that track before. It's a place where those individuals who pay and subscribe to the YMCA can actually exercise by actually running, because there is no parkland sufficient for us to run unless we run on the streets. There are many projects that merit your consideration. I think that project like this would merit your consideration if it were combined with some other land acquisition that would solve the problem of the park shortage. And that is one of the reasons why I've been advocating for the city to take a much wider view of all of the parkland opportunities that we have, so that when projects of this merit come forward, we actually are balancing the needs of the community properly. Thank you very much.
Mark Ganji, followed by Ben Phillips.
Good afternoon, Chair, Manager, and members of the Housing Authority. My name is Mark Ganji. I'm the architect of Ganji Development, where I lead the design department. Ganji Development is a three-generation family-run corporation began in Glendale in 1947, which produces a wide range of projects. Our proposal on Pennsylvania Avenue is for high-quality, family, affordable housing of 2- and 3-bedroom units. We first met with the Housing Authority in December of 2009, and our project complies with the zoning code and density bonuses for low-income units, and it's also the lowest density of all projects proposed. We own the property, the schematic design is complete, and we are ready to proceed to design review and complete our construction documents. Our experience includes the design and construction of Metropolitan Water District's Water and Life Museums, which were the first LEED Platinum museums registered, and won numerous local, state, and national awards. The goal for this project is to set a new benchmark for sustainable design in affordable design for housing in the city, and we see a project that achieves LEED Gold or higher and Cal Green of the top tier. Sustainability is affordability, as a project would save energy, water, and waste. The subsidy for our project relates to the level of affordability we were creating, and as a developer of both market rate and affordable housing, our flexibility is great, as we can adjust the amount of subsidy to meet the agency's goals. We have experience in obtaining tax credits for low-income projects. Two of the properties we own and manage are a 124-unit project in Lancaster and a 147-unit project in Burbank. Both of these projects are low-income, and they were built using bond financing and 4% tax credits. We've also constructed numerous projects under the Davis-Bacon requirements and are familiar with them as well. We've enjoyed working with Glendale's professional staff and would like to continue to work with them to meet your goals for housing in our community. Thank you very much.
Ben Phillips, followed by John Perrone.
Thank you, Authority members, for the opportunity to speak with you today. My name is Ben Phillips. I'm the Vice President and Regional Director for Mercy Housing here in Southern California. I'm reminded in the previous conversation about housing quality and selection of developers of a quote from one of the founders of Baskin-Robbins, which is that there is hardly anything in the world that someone cannot make a little worse and sell a little cheaper, and those who consider price alone are that person's rightful prey. That's apparently on the wall in every Baskin-Robbins ice cream store. And I think that I can certainly speak for Mercy Housing and probably a number of the other developers here when I would say that we would welcome an in-depth evaluation of our track record, both of construction and operations long-term of our portfolio. We think that you're best served by selecting developers with a strong track record. Mercy Housing's developed over 40,000 units nationally or been involved in their financing. That's about a $1 billion portfolio of development nationally. We were started by the Sisters of Mercy and a number of other women religious, and as a result, we have a sort of filial relationship with Glendale Memorial Hospital, which is operated by Catholic Healthcare West, started by the same groups of nuns. Those sisters serve on our sponsor council and sort of keep us on the straight and narrow and dedicated to the mission as only sisters can. So we like to say that we have the balance sheet of a national company and the strength of a national company, but the heart of a local community development corporation. We've been in a unique partnership with New Directions, a nationally recognized service provider assisting veterans who are transitioning from their service after having made huge sacrifices in service of this country, who are having difficulty transitioning back into civilian life. We've been working with them in a number of different locations to develop housing that would include a comprehensive menu of services that the veterans could choose from to assist them in remaining stable and reintegrating into the community. And as a result, we were approached by city staff through New Directions at the direction of Mr. Quintero and the Housing Authority and the local veterans and veteran services community to see if there were any proposals that we could develop in the city of Glendale. And this proposal was developed in partnership, as I said, with Glendale Memorial Hospital. The president of the hospital, Mark Myers, is very supportive of the development, and we would like to work together to expand the services that Glendale Memorial Hospital provides in that immediate vicinity in the community, and to provide services to veterans that will expose the city to a minimal as minimum of a contribution as possible, and with a minimal level of risk. There's quite a bit of risk in pursuing these developments, acquisition costs, pre-development costs, and the fact that the hospital owns the property already will greatly assist in that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. John, the final card is John Perrin.
Mayor, Mr. Chairman, manager, members, and staff. My name is JP John Perrin. I'm the listing broker for the New Horizons Family Center property. New Horizons is one of two nonprofits that I performed feasibility analysis for last year. Both nonprofits were underwater, in trouble. One of them went bankrupt. The other one chose to divest their property by listing them with me. And I want to point out that the New Horizon Family Center plans to use the funds from the transaction with Path Ventures to pay back the grant money to the city, and that this amounts to over 10% of the request that Path Ventures is making to the city at this time. I want to point out that with Path Achieve and Path Ventures, it's a combination of both rehabilitation and new development. And I heard quite a bit of concern here this evening about rehabilitation versus new construction and development and where the money should go. And once they're vetted, for one, they're qualified as a developer. The rehabilitation is a rather small amount. The development is also a modest amount. And just wanted to point out that the New Horizons had served the community for a long time. They ran into problems by trying to do too much, and that the economy came and hit them as well as other nonprofits at the same time. They had very few choices. They made the only choice really left for them that allowed them to fulfill their obligations and walk away with a legacy. And I'd like to ask you to consider Path Ventures and their request to both help the city, veterans, and to help what was once a very strong nonprofit group that provided services to the city to walk away with their hands held high. Thank you.
Thank you. That's the final card. Okay, well, we'll start the discussion. I don't see anybody jumping in.
Oh, I'll jump. Mr. Chairman? One final comment from staff. If we could, we again will just review what we are asking you today. We're looking for your direction to do an RFP on the 5th and Sonora site, to fund the Path Achieve acquisition rehab, and then give us some direction on the specific project, Mercy Housing, and then put in some priority vetting the rest. What I would like to, and this is why I wanted to speak before you started your comments, I'd like for you to consider this, given what's happening with the state, consider this your last housing dollars. How would you spend that? And if there is a desire to carve a piece out of that for acquisition of property, acquisition of building, I should say, existing building stock, please factor that in through the prioritization of how you want to spend these dollars, which again, you should consider your last dollars. If it does stay, great, we're still in business.
Starbird.
Would you like a response to the question asked by Mr. Herbert Milano regarding the union loan?
Regarding
Yes.
the what?
Mr. Milano asked a question about if redevelopment's eliminated, what happens to the Union Bank loan that we have outstanding on the project.
Okay.
The answer is that's an enforceable agreement, and both under the redevelopment legislation and the housing legislation, you'd continue to receive tax increment funds to pay off that loan. So even in a situation of elimination, that loan is an enforceable obligation. The successor agencies, in this case the Housing Authority, would still receive funds to make the payments on that.
Question.
Mr. Manukian.
From staff, how many of these developers have 3 years of audited financial statements?
I couldn't tell you exactly who. That would be part of the vetting process that we'd go through. My guess is that some of them may, but I can't tell you here.
I
That's
see hands.
where
How
we
many of
do.
you guys have 3 years of audited financial statements? Just curious.
Lots of hands.
Okay, before we go any further,
May I
Mr.
interrupt?
Najarian.
I'm sorry. As you can tell, I've been back and forth to the back room conferring with the city attorney. There is a possibility that I have a conflict on this matter due to a source of income from the Sisters of Mercy, Glendale Memorial Hospital. So out of an abundance, and that conflict is still being analyzed. I was unaware that the Memorial Hospital was part of this proposal. It will still be analyzed, but in an abundance of caution, I'm going to recuse myself and step out of the room from this matter. And if it ever comes forward again, we'll have a more complete analysis by the city attorney. So I'm sorry to
that's right.
disrupt the proceedings.
I wanted to add that I had so many conflicts with sisters in my past, but a different order of, they were Salesians, actually. Okay, well, I'll start. I am specifically persuaded by Alternative 4 on Mercy Housing, which is the 48 units on Los Feliz. It blends senior housing, veteran housing, and at $83,000 per unit. I know that's a sliding scale, but it is one of the lowest of the proposals. So I'm particularly interested in that one and pursuing that, as I would put that on my top priority. I think the location is good. Partnering with Glendale Memorial, I think, makes a lot of sense. They've done this type of project in the past, so I'm absolutely persuaded there. Then number 2, Path Achieve. I think we have to move forward. As everyone knows, we're working with Path Achieve and have been on numerous projects. This is sort of the continuum of care in the sense that they have the homeless family location. This particular building, once it's rehabbed and all of the current tenants are moved out and relocated, once it's rehabbed, that means that families can now take the next step towards achieving an affordable housing situation. It's going to be somewhat interesting to see how we can eventually move them out of this building and into standard housing somewhere. Then the 5th in Sonora, I do think we should go out to RFPs on 5th and Sonora, but at the same time, since there's a number of us that are also interested in looking at the question of rehabbing, perhaps we can also go out and get a feel for what that property is worth. I understand we paid, what, $6 million for it? Is it still worth $6 or is it worth $5.5? Are there better deals out there in terms of rehabbing existing rental units? Mr. Najarian assured me that there are, and so I'm not so sure that there are, but I certainly haven't done any research. So, but he says he looked in the MLS listings. There were a number of buildings available, built in the 80s and 90s, that he thinks might work for us. So that's basically where I am. And in terms of the YMCA, I do have a soft spot for the YMCA. When I first came to Glendale in 1977, I worked a lot with the population there, both those that were housed in the single occupancy units, and then various people, young people that were placed throughout the facility. And since that time, I think everyone knows they've done an excellent job. But it is a major undertaking, and one that I think is going to take a lot of balancing, and I don't want to rule it out. I would be happy to have the staff interact with the Y, the board, and the developers. But I am looking at it just as one of the staff members mentioned. I'm looking at this as the final sort of monies that the city will be able to allocate for the housing, for affordable housing. And I think this priority is the best way to get some housing built quickly, with the Mercy Glendale Memorial Project and with Path Achieve, get those two done, and then we'll see what's left and what we can do with the money. So that's where I am at this point. Mr. Weaver?
Seems funny, Mr. Quintero, ever since you started this thing about veterans, and then I jumped in as the two veterans, now we have a third veteran on the council. Seems fitting. Everybody's coming in with veteran proposals. But I'm with you on Mercy Housing. I think that is good. Its location and the connection to Memorial Hospital, I think, serves a useful purpose. Path Achieve, yes, it's a low amount, and we had a lot of presentations by Nick Lamb and company on working on that, so I think that should go forward. Fifth and Sonora, putting an RFP out isn't too bad. Let's see what's in the marketplace out there. And based on what I've read and questions I've asked, everything, the only other two that I'm comfortable with, and I'm not ready to bless either one yet, is the two that are owned, totally owned. That's the YMCA and Ganji. Those are owned. And I think I heard them say, it's Ganji, I'm sure, YMCA might say the same thing. Let staff go back and work with them, see if they can bring costs down or something to get in. I'm guessing that not guessing, but I'd be certain that what they're charging is based upon the subsidy that we give. So it's a balancing act. Maybe nothing can be done, but I don't mind giving those staff direction to look at those two and see if they can come back with something. Be nice to get both of them, but I'd like to let staff do that. I don't think we know enough yet. The others, I don't care how we do it. If I'm looking for the last time out, the three that we go around and looking at the other two, I don't think we can go any further than that right now. Let's hope all the bad news doesn't develop out there in the future and we can continue to do more.
Mr. Mincy, then Mr.
I certainly, I'm looking at projects nowadays, too, that will help some of our veterans that are coming back and have been around a long time. The Mercy Housing, I certainly support. Partly, the hospital owns the property. I think they have, Mercy Housing has a good reputation. It's something we should definitely go forward on. Path Achieve, of course, they've been wonderful to our community and are currently serving so many new people, or of our citizens. I personally like the YMCA. Maybe it's the fact that years and years ago I would stay at their hotels once in a while when I was at some city I'd never been into before. But they have a good reputation also, and they own the property, and they're right downtown and close to everything. Those are the ones I personally am thinking as we're talking to prioritizing some of these.
Fifth and Sonora.
Fifth and Sonora, too.
Okay, anyone else? Who else is next? Oh, Ms. Friedman, you're next.
Questions, actually.
You turned it off.
Did I? No, it's on. The Saffron and Associates project, the total square feet is 9,750 for 30 units. Is that correct? That's 300 square foot, approximately on average. 300 square feet per unit, 325.
That's the land square footage.
It's the footprint of the building.
Correct.
I think you have
Yes.
2 stories on that building.
Okay.
I believe there's
Is that right? 9,750, 30 units?
footprint of the property. Yes.
Yeah, it's
Just under-
a very old, very dense project, housing development in there.
And the other question is, has there been any, in terms of the recommendation from staff, has there been any disagreements amongst staff regarding the recommendations?
No, everybody agrees with me.
That's what I'm afraid of.
No, Mr. Manukian, there has not been, and is the first council
Are there
members-
any memos we should be aware of?
No memos that you should be aware of. We've given you the information. Really, the Fifth and Sonora is a property that with a clock ticking on it. The question is
Which property?
Fifth and Sonora.
Fifth and Sonora.
The question that we'll look at as we start to prepare the RFQ is what is the value, and do you want to dispose of that and use those funds somewhere else, or do you want to move forward with a project?
These costs that you have, are they building costs or do they include the land costs?
On on all the projects?
Yeah, like Mercy Housing, you have $83,000.
Those are based.
It includes the land cost?
Yes. And we haven't examined those costs.
So the $4
so we're
million
taking it on
is
face
part
value.
of the land acquisition cost as well?
It is the gap, yes, it includes the land acquisition, and it's the gap that has been identified as need assistance from the Housing Authority.
Probably the one that doesn't is the Fifth and Sonora. I think there, that value and the subsidy doesn't include the cost of the land.
No, and that was
Which one, who's proposing to develop Fifth and Sonora?
That's the one we recommend to go out for an RFP on it.
The number that we've identified there is the reservation of dollars we would set aside.
Right, that's the land that we own over on West
Right,
Putnam.
right. Has there been an increase in demand from veterans who are returning in this area for housing? How many veterans do we have in the area? Do we know?
It's a difficult number to achieve. We've heard that there might be up to 400 veterans in the Glendale area that have been
Where
recently
have you heard
discharged.
from?
Census Bureau. We've been working with Veterans Affairs, LA County Veterans Affairs officers as well. We have a VETRAP, a Veterans Rental Assistance Program, that's been in place for about 2-3 months now. We have 11 veterans that are signed up under that program. So it's one of the needs that we've been looking at.
And Mercy Housing is proposing housing for what, again?
Veterans. If I'm not mistaken, I believe nearly all of the projects are listed as proposed as veterans, with the exception of the Path Achieve.
It's the in thing these
unit.
days?
Well, it's a priority that the previous Housing Authority had established as a local need.
Didn't the YMCA is for seniors, though?
Thank you for the correction. Well, the YMCA is for seniors.
Is for seniors and veterans, or just seniors?
Proposed as seniors, as it is now.
Okay. All right, thank you.
I have a question.
Ms.
If you were done.
I'm done.
Was the Mercy Housing 100% veterans? Did I hear that there was some sort of mix?
Listed as families with a priority for veterans.
So if we don't have enough veterans for the need, then you would be for families. Well, the thing there are a few things about the Mercy Housing project that puts it on the top for me. Out of all of the projects that incorporate veterans, it's the only one that I've seen that has a provider, a service provider, that's already working with veterans that knows how to handle the issues that returning veterans might have. I do like that it's families with the priority for veterans, because we don't really know what the need's going to be. But we know that we have a need for family affordable housing. And I think that the proximity to the hospital for certain families could be very important. It's certainly in a transit-heavy area. It's walking distance from the train station. And it's, I think, the least expensive of the options because of the property being owned by the hospital. Path Achieve, it's very cost-effective and with a group that we've worked with a lot. Fifth and Sonora, we have to do something with. I don't know yet whether I will favor selling it off or developing on it, but I think we should put an RFQ out and see what shakes out and analyze what we would be able to spend the money on otherwise and see what gives us the best project. I'm interested in doing something with the YMCA. I have some concerns about the current proposal. I'd like staff to work with them. I think they share a lot of my concerns from my conversation with them. I'd like staff to continue working with the Y. For me, that would be my next project in the pipeline. I do believe that we'll continue to have affordable housing funds in the future. Even if redevelopment goes away, there's so much affordable housing activism and so many affordable housing lobby groups that I can't imagine that will completely disappear. And we do have to provide affordable housing of some sort as long as we have our redevelopment agency by state law. So I don't know what the options are. As Mr. Manukian brought up earlier, I'm open to exploring any option of providing these services in the way that helps the community the most. So that's my priority list. So pretty much jives with staff. Or it does, exactly. And with my colleagues so far.
Okay. Ms. Parazian, do you have any comments?
I'll go with Mercy first, then with the Path Achieve. And since we don't have any senior housing in the pipeline, I mean in the near future, I'll go with the YMCA and Fifth and Sonora.
Mr. Manukian?
Yes, I would like to know how much will it cost us to administer these programs?
Through the construction phase or later?
Well, through the whole thing, yeah.
To put these projects together.
Staff time, that's what I mean. How much?
Correct.
I know we have allocated $3.2 million for administration costs and ongoing operation costs.
Correct.
Is part of the administration of these contracts part of that cost?
Correct. Correct. There are
Not all of it.
There are positions within those numbers.
Not all of it.
No, that would be responsible for negotiating these projects, seeing them through entitlement construction, and putting them in place, and then monitoring them over periods of time.
Okay. And
If I can, a reminder
how long will it take for these projects to complete? Do we have a set time? Are we going to set?
The Mercy Housing project, because of the commitment of home funds, we have to get to a development agreement stage by the end of June. So you're going to have to get through the entitlement process.
How long will development take? Will we set a time limit, or is it what is acceptable? How long does a project like this take?
In terms of what you qualify as development.
In terms of completion.
Titling, construction, completion. The projects of those types of sizes typically take about 18 months to complete construction, some a little longer, some shorter.
Okay. And you said they have control of the site?
Mercy, yes.
Yes.
Yes. One of the partners in Mercy is the owner of the property that's being proposed under Alternative 4.
Okay. Can we set time limits in terms of completion for the project?
Well, I would encourage you, as staff talks with these developers, to come back to you with what everybody thinks is a reasonable time limit. Now, Mercy, because of the transfer of home funds, we've got a quick timeline on that to get to a development agreement stage, which will spell out the timeline for development.
Will it also spell out the costs
Yes.
in terms of coming back to us for additional costs?
Yes.
In addition to the $83,000 per unit?
It'll spell out the entire budget for the project, including development costs.
Will that come back to the Housing Authority for approval?
Part of your development agreement for approval.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, do I have a motion?
that we recommend the staff recommended funding as proposed.
Which is Mercy Housing and Path Achieve.
Path Achieve, and then dealing with Fifth and Sonora.
As the priorities.
Yeah, the list of priorities.
Vote that one first. 3. I think we all concur.
Do I have a second?
Second. That's the whole.
Roll call.
Authority members, Friedman,
Yes.
Menuchyan.
Now, I want to, which project is it? Yes, but I want to know which one. It's Mercy and Path at this point.
And exploring Fifth and Sonora.
Okay.
Menuchyan, yes. Minsky?
Yes.
Najarian? Barazian?
Yes.
Beaver?
Aye.
Chair Quintero.
Yes.
And now how many others can we explore?
Okay, make that
Do we need that in
motion.
a motion, or? But I mean, for the rest?
Well, unless you
Staff-
want to do
Does
a...
staff have enough direction for the rest?
I mean, does that tell all the rest to go home?
Why don't we repeat what we heard and make sure it fits with the consensus in the council? That was exploring further the YMCA. I heard many of you mention that sort of number 4 on your list. I'm not exactly sure where the Ganji proposal stood. Mr. Weaver mentioned exploring that.
It's the only one in North Glendale.
I don't have a problem with that. I mean,
Just explore. We don't.
what are the costs and
That's fine.
what do they have in mind?
That's fine. Okay, then we would be exploring further the YMCA project and the Ganji project.
I mean, they're all very worthy projects, and I would like to get more information on all of them. I don't know if you need, at this point, more of a priority list. I mean, the YMCA certainly would be my number 4, but I think after that, I'd like to hear more information. Some of them are very preliminary.
Yes, but land-owned. Ganji and YMCA are land-owned. That's a lock in one way. It's not the others. They don't even have control of the land.
Right. Well, we're also assuming that
Well,
the land-owned will be a better price for us. We
but
don't know.
they have escrows that terminate at a certain time, et cetera, where the other two are owned in fee by the two parties.
We might note that depending on your direction on Fifth and Sonora when we bring that back, that could take quite a chunk of your available funding for this year, which could then drive your ultimate decisions on the balance of the projects. At this point, you might leave the balance of the projects to those projects, to those agencies, if they're willing to submit further refinement of their projects. Move to kind of that first phase of a pro forma approach. If they're willing to invest the time and energy in that, then you can still consider that as you see where Fifth and Sonora will eventually go.
It's a dynamic process we're going through.
Again, Mr. Najarian expressed interest in looking at and so did you, Mr. Quintero, looking at the value of Fifth and Sonora. We'd look at that versus getting RFPs for its development. And then you'd need to make a decision. Do you proceed with the development proposal? Do you put it on the market to sell it? You really can't hold it much longer. You're going to have problems with HCD on holding inventory land. So,
Yeah, and I'm only willing to entertain the idea of the appraisal, but quite frankly, I think we're going to wind up going out to an RFP on Fifth and Sonora because we paid an awful lot of money, we own it, and it's a great place to have an affordable housing project, without a doubt. I mean, you're familiar with it. It's a great location, and so we'll see.
I'd like to make a motion on the 2 land-owned, YMCA and Ganji, and see where they go. It's just to ferret it out and see if there's anything there. Cost is going to be a major factor. Too much money and nothing is going to go. There's other things
But
I'd
can I
like
ask you
to
a
know
question?
about. Yeah.
Why are you assuming that because they're owned by the developer that we'll get a better deal than something that's not owned? You know, we're making that assumption, but we don't know.
Now, if you're looking at a project that has a better chance to proceed, it's one where it's already owned by the developer. And but anybody can walk in, like ADI did on Salem. Hey, give me your parking lot, and I'll buy the lot next door and put it together. Well, what if we hadn't given them the parking lot? I mean, we've had that more than one time in here, where developers have come to staff or to us and said, we like your parking lot over there. You let us have it in an exclusive, and we will come up with a project. And then we never hear from them again. We've had them up in Montrose. We've had them all over the city. I like control.
Well, I'd like to go one extra if we're going to do that. I'd also like to I'm losing the name, of the Path Venture, the lot on Maryland and Glendale.
Bet that out, too?
Sure, let's put that on there, too. I mean, that's a legitimate, the people that are proposing that, the Path Venture people, the first gentleman that spoke. I mean, that's a Malloy, that's a legitimate agency that
about
has
the three
done this in the past. It's a CHODO. I just learned a new term. So let's
Do
let
the three.
them.
I'll make
yeah,
a
let's do
motion for the three of them, for further analysis or whatever the words are.
And I would anticipate when we come back to you with Fifth and Sonora, we'd come back to you with further refinement of those others, because when you make a decision about Fifth and Sonora, the blocks begin fall into place in terms of funding.
Exactly.
Okay, do I have a second for Mr. Weaver's motion?
Second, is it definitely an interest?
Yeah, just look at it, ferret it out, see if further refinement will make any of them happen.
Okay, if there's no more comment, roll call, please.
Authority members: Friedman,
Yes.
Nukian,
Yes.
Incy,
Yes.
Najarian, Karazian,
Yes.
Weaver,
Aye.
Chair Quintero.
Yes. What's next?
Next is authority member staff comments.
During authority member staff comments, I hear none.
Move to adjourn.
Second.
We are adjourned.